Okay, we're good.
Okay, we will begin Tuesday, January 11th, 2022, City Council work session. I need an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to jump straight into our public comment phase, and I have several names listed, so we're going to work through that first. And Rusty will find Tim Ramey for me. Like a talk show host sometimes.
Good evening.
Go ahead, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, quite a bit of outpouring of commentary here. Just if anybody's keeping up on the scores, it's very similar to last week where there were, I think, 23 or 26 opposing and 3 in favor. Tonight so far, I think I've read 22 letters opposing, 3 in favor, including one of the members of the Planning Council. And so, you know, I thought maybe you've heard this, but we got to really boil this down. This does not belong in fast track status. You don't have a consensus on this. And it is so unlike the issues you dealt with last week, which have broad public support and broad consensus and absolutely should be fast tracked. So I think the fact that you're swinging from pillar to post on proposal, it's 2,000 square feet plus a 600 square foot ADU. Next, it's 3,500 square feet, but oh, we cut the floor area ratio by 1 decimal point, but nobody really noticed that, except it's really about a 25% cut. You're not coming at this with a coherent strategy, at least in my opinion. And I think you should take some time off and kind of study this and figure out what the public wants. At its most basic form, zoning is all about trying to achieve a public benefit by placing some limitations and perhaps some loss of value for individual property owners. Every city deals with zoning. It's completely reasonable. Our city has done it better than most, I think. That's why we have such a livable, beautiful city. But we can't perceive any public benefit to what you're proposing. It doesn't smell right. It smells like you're trying to limit families, which one of your planning committee people said there are no families in Cannon Beach. You're trying to limit multifamily. You're trying to limit reasonable houses on large lots. And I just think this is completely backwards. You're going to have to really slow down and study this a little bit more and try and get it right. Actually, the proposal for the January 4th meeting, I thought had a lot of good stuff to it. The floor area ratios there seemed logical. The 600 square feet for the additional ADU or additional structure was logical. And if we want to get at trying to address not affordable housing, because that's not going to happen, but workplace housing or worker housing, ADUs would be a really good way to do that. So I think we've got some work to do. We kind of took a step backwards this week versus last week. And I hope the council decides to become a little more thoughtful in this.
Thank you, Tim. And Tim is right on time. So I want to remind folks that we're going to maintain our 3-minute rule, and I was keeping track. So thank you again, Tim. Next will be Lisa Kerr. Lisa.
Hi, council members. I sent in a letter, and I think that pretty much represented what I think about this subject. But I do want to just say very briefly that because people against the proposals were mobilized to write letters is not a reflection of what the public wants. I've spoken to many people who do feel that a cap on large houses is in the public benefit. It's interesting because one person's idea of what is reasonable, 5,000 square feet, to another person seems totally unreasonable and, out of the realm. So I think that using terms like reasonable, they're very subjective and it's very difficult to determine. I think when you look at the community and how it looks and what fits in with the community, I think you can tell for yourself what is in keeping with the comprehensive plan. A lot of the letters that there's lots of repeat letters that you received, but I don't think the fact that there was not a mobilization on the part of people who are for limiting the housing is any reflection on what the community wants. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Caleb Whitmore. Caleb.
Hey, everyone. Good evening. Can I share my screen on this, or can it only do a video feed? Does anybody there?
Yes, you can share your screen.
Okay, great. I'll do that in a moment. And sorry, I just stepped out of family dinner time because this is right at the hour for that. Before I get into what I wanted to talk about tonight, I did just want to take a moment of kind of personal reflection as this issue is heated up, which is important to me personally and my family. I do think it's very easy for us in the community to get fired up when something comes in that's important to us, and then spend a lot of time on it. And I've had a moment of thoughtful reflection. You guys on the council and listening to last week's meeting that had a lot of other stuff besides just this, you guys put a lot of time in on all of the things that you need to deal with, and you have as long with the planning commission put time into this issue. So even though it's the 11th hour when many of us in the community became aware of it, I do want to just acknowledge and say thank you for the time and effort you put in your overall roles for helping the city and on this issue. That does deserve and merit recognition. So I'm going to share my screen here. In my letter to you, which I hope they'll take the time to read. I did write probably more than is a succinct letter, but I talked about the underlying issue that I think is really at hand here as this discussion has played out and as I started to talk about it with people in the community more and more. And the issue is terminology. So I did a quick analysis of homes, and this is public records for those that I could find on the Planning Commission and City Council. The analysis of your livable area and your FAR, per my understanding of the ordinance. And this is really important because it's playing out in media, it's playing out in discussions in the community. The same term, square feet, is being used. So we talk about a square foot cap of 2,000 square feet or 3,500 square feet or a ratio-based cap. And it always comes back to this notion of square feet. But the problem is everybody in the world uses square feet to refer to livable space in a home. Yet the proposed ordinances refer to FAR, which is dependent on the city's definition of gross floor area and floor area ratios, which include unhabitable spaces. And as you can see here, the difference can be quite extreme. So if you can see this screen here, I'm trying to zoom in on it as best I can. This between what the county says home size is versus what FAR is can be quite significant. On average, it looks to me from looking at this set of homes as well as just kind of randomly clicking around homes on county's data in the city, it's about a 30% difference on average, sometimes significantly more than that, between what someone thinks their home size is and what the floor area ratio is. And that is, I think, a prime reason why this needs to get taken off the fast track and really studied much more in detail. Jeff Adams has called that out in his study, and I saw this last week. He talked about it being in the footnote, but then your discussion continued to refer to 30% of homes being affected by a 2,000 square foot limit. Well, that 30% is based on the county's records of living area, not based on a city-based calculation of FAR, which if you have porch, garage, carport, etc., double, high ceiling area of your home, unfinished basement, those all add to FAR, and you could end up with a significant non-conformity for a home where somebody thinks, oh, I'm well below the limit. And that's going to create and is creating massive public confusion around this issue. And if you proceed on this process without being able to slow down and clarify that loud, clear, frequently, far, and often, you're going to end up with a lot of people who just haven't picked up on the detail yet and are going to be extremely surprised and dismayed down the road. So I just wanted to call this out. I would hope that each of you have done this analysis for your homes and maybe with people that you know in town. And if you've done this and you're still comfortable with it, that's good for you to know. I've done this for my home. I'm encouraging everybody I talk to do this for their home. And it is surprising to people when they look at this and they go, wow, my home is much, much bigger than I thought it was. I didn't think this limit was going to apply to me.
Caleb, with time, and I gave you extra time for that really nice appraisal at the very beginning. So extra, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Will Rasmussen.
There's still some more on the zoning.
Did I miss? Oh, I'm sorry, Allison Reynolds. Rusty, I missed that one, sorry. Thanks. I wrote notes over her name, so oops, my fault. Allison, go ahead.
Thank you. Allison Reynolds here on behalf of 364 Oak Street. And I have just a few comments for you on item 1, the zoning ordinance amendments. So last week, council passed the limits on lot consolidations and removed the PUD process from the code. And those were the original fast track issues that council wanted to make sure were dealt with early. And there was broad community consensus that those were good changes and needed to be acted on now. But as Tim Ramey, I think, put really well, for the other changes, specifically the caps on single family home size, there's a lot of opposition and a lot of confusion. And I think also a lot of information that still needs to be gathered. For example, as Caleb explained with that very helpful graphic, the cap restricts gross square footage, but the numbers we have now and what you guys were talking about last time we met with, trying to draw the line at, how many homes is it okay to have in conformance versus not, those aren't the same measurement. We also know that council is concerned about housing affordability and agree that this is a really critical issue for the community. However, it's not clear that size limits would actually impact affordability because it's so supply and demand driven. I always think of communities like San Francisco or New York, where the homes are very small, but they're also very unaffordable. And it's because of a demand issue, not really about size. So we would just really encourage council to explore that affordability issue in the broader context of the zoning ordinance and look at other tools that might be more effective for affordable housing that is so important for the community. So I think our just kind of big message is we really just don't think this stuff is the right kind of thing to fast track, and that it really should be thought about in the broader context of zoning code. But second, if council does decide to move forward on these issues, I wanted to just again raise one of the issues we talked about last week, and that's the limits on improvements to existing homes. We still think that a 50% fair market value cap on improvements will be counterproductive. And I think Planning Director Adams kind of noted that this type of limit is designed to actually lead to removal or demolition of these homes. It's the kind of thing that cities typically use for, say, a non-conforming use, like a house that's in an industrial area that isn't actually appropriate to have there anymore. So I think this is a very different situation. These are lots that are zoned for housing. These are older homes that have a lot to do with the fabric of the community. And so we really would urge you, if you do move forward now or later, to think about not placing a value on the amount of improvements that you can do to a home so that we don't see those sort of unintended consequences of demolition of these older homes and they can be preserved. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now we go to our next, Will Rasmussen.
Good evening. Good to see everybody this evening.
Hello.
I'm Will Rasmussen from Miller Nash LLP on behalf of Haystack Rock LLC. I am here to speak about the second discussion item on the council agenda tonight, the Roberts request for an easement down unimproved Nenana. I just want to make 3 points this evening. First, that it would be premature for the city to set the Roberts easement request for a hearing. Second, and I touched on this last month, the city has no obligation to consider, much less some short time frame to process an easement request. There's simply no law that requires processing of private easement requests. And third, instead of scheduling a hearing, the city should instead take this opportunity to ask the Roberts for additional information regarding their conceptual proposal at this point. First, why it's too early for the city to hold a hearing on the easement request. Simply, we don't have a complete design. There's no clear depiction of the Hemlock intersection with this proposal. There's no traffic study or analysis with this proposal. There's no structural detail or depiction of how this big structure would relate to the dewatering system that the council knows is under this area. Basically, I would think the council would at least want the same level of detail that the city received in the first access application before it would consider granting an easement or holding a hearing to grant an easement with this latest half-designed proposal. To the second point, that the council has no obligation to consider any easement, much less a short time frame in which it must act. I think it was Councillor Benefield at the first discussion, council discussion on this point, asked what law requires the city to grant a private easement over a public right of way. And, I'd said no such law exists. He said, council, there was substitute counsel, Bill Kabizman wasn't able to make that hearing. So they'd come back with it. I have since searched around. I still maintain there is no law that requires the city to open an unimproved right of way. I submitted a letter to the city, which is in your supplemental packet from this evening. I think it's on page 39 of the supplemental packet, documenting the cases that exist in this space. There's no statute that requires any such thing. So there's just no requirement. So I don't know why the city keeps feeling this urgency to move this easement request along through a public process. And third, a hearing would be a big escalation of this easement request. And if the city sets this thing for a hearing, I'm going to have to get in touch with all 50 people who submitted comments and testified in opposition to the first proposal. And it sure seems to me like that would be a whole bunch of unnecessary work when there's still an appeal pending. The Robertses are asking the Oregon Supreme Court to consider the Court of Appeals upholding the city's denial of their first building application. The Roberts, Stan Roberts said to the Daily Astorian in an article, which I submitted with my letter that's in the record now, that he, quote, the article says, quote, Roberts is not interested in building a smaller house. If the large house gets denied and he's not building a small house, why would the city take the abuse and go through the time and expense and process to have a hearing on an easement
Wrap it up, Will. We're at 3
probably
minutes.
won't matter at all? So I would respectfully encourage the city, instead of scheduling a hearing on this easement, to take this time to ask the Roberts to submit information so that it can even consider this request, specifically information on the level that the prior design had, with an intersection with Hemlock and a safety analysis. Thank you for this opportunity to talk this evening.
Thank you. Okay. Randy, Neal.
Can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead.
My name is Randy Neal, PO Box 1092. I'm here to talk about give comments on the system development charges review. I've talked a few times before. I submitted 2 pages. I hope you have those. Basically, I just want to remind that, other cities' rates, we determined with the consultants are irrelevant. So just because Newport and Lincoln City have $8,000 rates makes no matter to us. And likewise, if Yachats and Sisters have a $4,000 rate, it's no difference to us. Levels of past fees are irrelevant. The rates are really a function of what are the projects, how do they impact capacity, how do they impact new developments within the community. I caution you to not try to go through and pick an arbitrary number in between, because there are rules around these where fees can only be spent on the projects that they've been approved for and collected for. And then finally, developers always have the option to challenge these rates. And in the cases of commercial developments, it's not an $8,000 rate. These can be in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. The rates, really have like 6, 7 different factors embedded in the analysis. And for some reason, the city and the consultants have picked population as sacred. And, it relies on whatever information is public there, even though all of the other assumptions they've updated, they've chosen what to use, whatever, to do this. And the population growth estimates, for the parks master plan and the water, sewer, wastewater just seem, the parks one is basically outrageous. Through the last 20 years of actual city budgets, I can see that the city has collected almost $600,000 in SDCs, and at $4,000 per project, that basically says the city has done 140 projects over the last 20 years. And year by year, you can see in that graph, here's what's been done. In the parks population estimate, the city has only met that line 1 time in the last 20 years. In the case of the water, sewer, wastewater growth, there's been about 5 years where it's been about that level. But those were always the recession years where nobody could get financing to build a house or do a project. And if you take away 5 years of low stuff and take away 5 years of high stuff, we still come back to that historical average. So I believe the gross assumptions are, need some work. And that is what drives the capacity for some of these projects. There's about 40 projects in the SDC analysis. I only have an issue, I've been only talking about 3 of them, but they are the largest 3. The cost to recalculate, happens to be $60,000 and makes up $900 of the $8,000 fee. And, it seems outrageous to realize that the 3rd largest project of 40 projects is the cost to calculate the damn rate in the first place. And part of this is the growth factor that's used. If we did the historical rate, this would be a much more reasonable $500 kind of item. The Nikas Park improvement, there was no cost estimate included in the master plan. The staff just now went through and said, we need $1.2 million to do the capacity for this thing. Supposedly we're doing this because, we have additional growth that's going to happen at the 30% level. Consultants tell us that, if the city doesn't grow, then it won't be spent on this. Well, NACUS isn't really fall in that kind of category. It's not there for additional capacity for real levels of new residents and new homes. The city has adequate park capacity for any new resident levels over the next 20 years. The elementary school is financed with tourism funds. The park The remaining park should be funded with tourism funds. The NACUS plan in the master plan makes no mention of capacity. However, it does reference tourism and the ecological and cultural needs, but there's really no mention about growth. It's the largest single project in all the SDC project for the parks. It makes up 93% of the park rate, and nobody has really reviewed the scope and the costs of this $1 million project. There's also no mention of how is a commercial development going to play in this parks SDC. The wastewater upgrade, I don't have any issues with the cost estimates because it's an actual. And I don't have any issues with the gross assumption because that's one where the consultants are right, where the two things will balance out each other and the rate will be the rate. The issue is it's the link of development to the capacity. The growth assumptions assumes we will only get 64 more units connected to the system, but then we'll be magically at full capacity. It will be at full equilibrium. We don't need any more and we won't have any less. This is hard to believe. History tells us we're likely.
We're over time, Randy, so hurry up.
Okay. Well, basically history tells us there's going to be a lot more projects and we're likely to have the additional capacity. And I believe there's more capacity there. And as a result, this particular charge is overstated as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, we're going to go to the list of attendees. I will ask for hands raised. If anybody else has additional comments. Anybody happening?
Yeah, there's two.
Here. Eric Ostrander. Let's start with Eric. Caleb's already spoke, so we'll see who else wants to speak first.
I think Caleb wanted to speak on two topics.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, this is Eric Ostrander, 156 West Taft. I wanted to speak in opposition for the 2,000 square foot, the 2,500 square foot, the 3,000 square foot, whatever number you guys, the arbitrary number you guys are landing on for the restriction to building size in Cannon Beach. I don't have much more to say than the few letters that I've submitted to you guys, but I just wanted to speak as a resident and somebody that actually lives in town that I think this would be something that would harm the ability for families to be able to raise a family in a house. And kind of in reference to Robin and Nathan McCarthy and Benefield's questions during the last meeting, and then online, and kind of their commentary they've had that they don't understand why somebody would need a larger house. They don't understand why people would need more space than 2,000 square feet or whatever arbitrary number that they've come up with or the Planning Commission has come up with. All of these kind of arguments are irrelevant given the significant public outcry there has been for this is not a number that is going to be like useful in maintaining the village character. Some of these larger houses, Benefield's, Risley's, McCarthy's houses, based on what the county records say, would be exceeding these limits that they're placing. So given that they don't have any children who live with them, I don't understand how they can kind of contradict what people with children in town are saying, the space that they need, why they're questioning that. So that was my biggest thing. I did send a couple letters in, so I hope you guys read those. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Caleb, then.
Hi again. So the second thing I wanted to speak on was the notice about the cows system. I saw some conversation about this earlier in the week and then saw it in the packet. And I did send in written comment around this as well. But I personally, and for my family's safety, think this is a really important system to keep working. So while advances in technology like cell phones and whatnot have been great. An example, our kids, our oldest is almost 14. She doesn't have a cell phone. None of our kids have cell phones. We just don't think that's an age appropriate thing yet. They do have one cell phone that we'll share around as needed between them, but it's a dumb phone, so it's not going to do a lot of the functions. And so, you know, the community-wide audible system, I think, is a really important emergency feature. And if this is something that is lacking funding in the public budgets, I'm pretty confident that there are enough residents and citizens here that find value and importance in this, that we could ourselves come up with the money and do a community fundraiser or something like that. This is definitely something I think we need to keep active. And I just wanted to speak that if this is something I could personally help with, you know, a fundraising effort, if it came to that level of solution, I'd love to be involved in that. But it definitely is something I think we need to keep active in our community. Thanks.
Thank you. Sounds like a new member for our CERT team there. Okay, I think that does it. I don't see any new hands, so I'm going to call it. Find my text here. There we go. Okay, we will close the public comment and move for our first discussion, which is the zoning ordinance track. I'm not going to call it a fast track anymore because I think we did our fast track stuff, but I'm going to let Jeff go forward.
All right. Well, thank you. And so, yes, and it might be a great point to just at least talk about the process and kind of options going forward. So, as you said, Mayor, that this was originally considered kind of a fast track process. It came before you guys after a series of work sessions before the Planning Commission, deliberation by the Planning Commission. We had a joint work session with you, the DRB, and the Planning Commission discussing the code audit. So it's had an extensive process. All of that process is part of the record, and staff doesn't repeat all of that, doesn't go into all the recommendations, but does not mean that I don't recommend everyone to read that record. That record's part, and it's available on the website, and every document, every word said by anyone in there can be looked at and reviewed and weighed. And then, so where we're at now, you came with four, which was 4 to 5, because you had the lot combinations, which you move forward with. The second item was floor area ratios with lot coverage with a cap that worked together. And that was under Planning Commission's recommendation at 3,500 to begin with. And then that was reduced by you guys at the work session down to 2,000. The table was left in there because I wanted to give you guys the alternative of going forward with a floor area ratio, lot coverage with a cap, remove the cap if you'd like, and just go with the floor area lot coverage, or keep the existing floor area ratios and lot coverage and get rid of, keep the cap. So there's different options as far as the way forward. And so what you can do tonight is review the different options I've provided for you. I gave you a new table, and I tweaked those floor area ratios and lot coverages to 0.4s and 0.5s, and then gave you the table, which I think is attachment B in your packet, but it's the matrix that shows you those calculations. And then as few tiers as I could in kind of grading up and down on those. and gave you the, what that looks like in, for 1 unit, 2 units, or if you just go with a 600 flat cap, expansion for a detached structure. So I wanted to give you those numbers, but tonight you can ask for changes, redraft, bring it back to another work session before you guys, or to bring it back for a public hearing. And I'm calling it track 2, these 2 that are left. Or you can recommend a remand. In other words, give us the options, what you want to look at that draft, what your recommendations are, remand that back to the planning commission, go back through the full process. Or that third option, which is we're getting ready to go to do the code audit, which would be a joint work session. So you could fast track this if you, or slow track it, whatever you want to call it. But defer that to the joint work session, which would be, we're targeting in late February, early March for that. And so go full remand, make recommendations and remand that to that work session. And so you've got various options tonight, and that's what a work session I think is about. That's why I wanted to provide these numbers and to provide you both options, both language I left in there, both the floor area ratio, lot coverage table, along with a cap, whether it's 2,000, 3,500, or I don't like the term that's being thrown out around as arbitrary. You have the data there. You have the limitations that have been discussed on the data. Yes, you can get better data. If I know anything about data, you can always get better data, okay? And we can always get better data. We'll get better data if you give us more time. And we'll bring it back with all of the qualifications on that data. And that's what we want to do. We want to be as transparent as possible. And I'm happy to bring that back. But we need more time to do that if you want to do that. And so that's why we originally said fast track these things that we can get through, whether it's the lot combination along with the plan development that we've got rid of. Do you want to add any things to that? Well, I recommend we come back with a track 2 version. This is what we did and gave you some draft language. I think Ms. Reynolds also spoke about the non-conforming. We did shift that a little bit, switching that down from 80 to 50, but there's always that option of getting rid of any kind of fair market value calculation within that. But you can spend more time on that as well. And I think when we talked about this at the Planning Commission, like I said, gave very good deliberation on a lot of these topics. And one of the things they talked about was changing the language. Well, they said, yes, we'll do that, but we'll do that at the code audit, which is what we're calling that track 2. Those are the kind of things you want to get into the details. You want to talk about, well, should garages be calculated within this? Should we change those terms? If we do that, I suggest we do take more time and push that further out, because we want to get to the best data that we can when we start doing that kind of analysis. And so any questions from anyone on what's before you, the language or the tables, or where you might want to go from here?
I'll start I don't really have a question. I just want to start the discussion. And I want to put a little caveat on the fact that this is a work session and that we are talking about things. Landing on an arbitrary number is kind of necessary sometimes in order to initiate discussion. It doesn't mean that that's the next number we're going to vote on. It means this is where we start discussion. And that's what I felt like we were doing last week when we had our discussion about this, and we took this out of the fast track and placed it back into a more comprehensive discussion that will happen. So that's my little rant on that. I think definitions that was mentioned a couple times. I think definitions of the square footage is critical. I understand that. the fact that it is common knowledge that when everybody talks about square footage, they talk about living area. Well, that makes sense if you're buying a home or if you're building a home or, all the normal stuff that we do. In our case, in this situation where we are trying to envision everybody hears this term, the village character, you're looking at a mass of structure. That's gross floor area. That includes the massive two-door garage. That is actually the most, to me, disagreeable aspect of most homes. So yes, gross floor area is the calculation. That is what I will be talking about when I say floor area, because that's the objectionable portion of what is a big building. Yeah. That doesn't mean we can start talking about, what is the best gross floor area that we'll be talking about. That's the discussion. But the definition that I will use is gross floor area. When we talk about our floor area ratio, we are talking about a ratio of the size of the lot as it is compared to the gross floor area. Correct? That's what that's the way I've always.
It's yes, exactly. Yeah.
So that's because, and I'm going to reiterate the fact that when somebody is looking at a house from the street perspective, it's the size of the house that you're looking at. Total. Has no relationship to the living area. So that's another part of my rant. I would now, I've always been a little squishy personally about what our floor area ratio does and how it creates. I remember a long time ago, we talked about creating a setback envelope situation. I would love to look into that and have maybe some research on other ways to look at the size of a building. And setback envelope was creating essentially a cubic space that is buildable within the size of the lot. And so that allowed folks to go up as long as you reduced. And floor area ratio kind of does this, but setback, when we were talking about it, also we were talking about the possibility of always setting back the second story further back than the lower story. Got really confusing. But I know it's a possibility. I know other places do this. I wouldn't mind looking into that as a possibility. Another topic that I would like to touch on is what Allison brought up both times that she has spoken, is that the value limit for renovation of any kind or remodel or expansion of a building. I would like to talk about, especially with the planning commission when we get together, is to take away in part the idea of the value totally, because it's size that we're talking about, that I'm talking about when I'm talking about a objectionable building. I know we have to use value when we're talking about plumbing and some of those code concepts. But when we're talking about, if somebody wants to put a dormer on the building, the value of it shouldn't make any difference. It's a dormer. Does it look good or does it not? That's the only real calculation that I'd want to put into it. Okay, I'll shut up now. Somebody else speak.
One thing that I'd like to say as a realtor is that, everyone's talking about square footage as being a value one way or the other. But if an oceanfront house is a smaller house, but it's oceanfront, a house on the east side is a lesser value, even though it's bigger. So it's very confusing when people are talking about losing their values, because we're not a development per se. And that means that the houses are all very similar and in a similar location. So it's always location. It isn't square footage. That's one thing. The other piece that I think there's a little misunderstanding about is that I think when we were talking about 2,000 square feet, we added 600 to that number for a garage or an ADU. And so I hear 2,000 all the time, and that's not what we ended up with. The other piece had to do with it had to do with what Allison was talking about, which was that I think when we were discussing this, we all came to the conclusion that that percentage was not important to a rebuild on a house that had been destroyed by fire or something else that was not man-made, but that we all kind of agreed that that wasn't a high priority. So I hope everybody will hear that too.
Robin, so you're pretty comfortable with just getting rid of kind of the value in that portion of the non-conforming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was appropriate for the time that it was in place, but I don't think now that it is.
Yeah, I think honestly, if you look across the city and look at, do we really want any of these structures to be, let's say, incentivized to conform? There's very few, I think most of us would say, because a lot of what I've heard from you guys and the Planning Commission, DRB, was the smaller cottages, the older cottages, that this would probably be most affected by value. You want to keep as many as you can.
Right.
So it's opposite of what it's written for.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the other thing I want to bring up is the letter campaign. It was really obvious when we read a lot of those letters that they were very similar. Over the years, I've heard from the citizens that they wanted smaller houses. I don't think those people have spoken up, and I hope to encourage the people that feel that way too, or it was a little surprising to see the number of people that we received letters from. Thank you for all your input. We do appreciate it. And I think the people that feel differently, I hope you'll write a letter to. So that's kind of.
Anybody else?
I have a couple of things. Just for clarification, Jeff, could you explain the table that you gave to us and explain what an FAR is, a Florida area ratio is, what it contains, what it includes, how that is on a lot? Questions that came up in one of the letters is on your far right on this table, it says detached. And you have a lots like 11,000 square feet might be 3,900, but a lot that is 14,500 is only 3,400 on the table. So why would a larger lot have less floor area coverage?
Because it's tiered.
Because of the percentage.
Because of that tiering. And
But
so
does that
you
make
can go straight. You can go straight 0.4. Just if you do that math, you'll see that those get pretty darn large. If you did a straight 0.4 all the way from 5,000 to 25,000 square feet. Now, if you Google floor area ratio and you look at any, you can look and you can see they have perfect kind of images or drawings. We could pull one up if we wanted, but really all it's saying is that a floor area ratio, if it's at 50%, of a floor area ratio, that means you have 2,500 of square feet that of gross floor area of building. Whether it's, you know, the way we've written it is that it's just one building, right? Then if you want it detached, you get an 600 more, okay? That's the way we have written it. Now you can do that as I had done in before the Planning Commission, where it's a one dwelling unit, then you get a certain, but if you do add in a second dwelling unit, whether that's an accessory dwelling unit, or if you're in the R2 district or R3 district, another unit, then you get a bump. And that's what that 0.4 and 0.5. So you would get more. So for example, 5,000 square foot lot, 2,500 means honestly that you could put a home across half of that, but that's not truly how it usually works because you've got setbacks and that, so that then you start stacking because you can then have 1,250 on one level, 1,250 on the second level. Now, in a big city, you could go up 6 levels and at 400 or whatever that is to get that. We don't do that because of building height here. So really, you're usually just talking about 2 levels. How much can you get per level? That's what that floor area ratio. Lot coverage is a different thing. So lot coverage, we're talking about how much really in permeable area do you have on your property. And so that's another area we've discussed as looking at and tweaking that. You know, do we need more lot coverage or less lot coverage to allow more trees and other things like that? And so, you know, those are all also definitional problems. And I think that's what the mayor was talking about, because what you include in those things are very different, because our lot coverage language is very different than any other language I've worked with anywhere else.
Okay, so define lot coverage. Is that the porches, the overhangs, the garages, the?
Yeah. So let me read that to you, okay? So our lot coverage is a lot coverage means the portion of the lot area that is covered with the following improvements. 1, the area within the exterior perimeter of all buildings, including dwellings, accessory buildings, garages, carports, and 2, the area of all structures that are 30 inches in height above the existing grade, including porches, decks, stairways, and 3, paved or graveled areas designated for off-street parking, and 4, and this is the one that I've never worked in a place that does this, that portion of the area of decks less than 30 inches in height above the existing grade, patios, courtyards, and graveled and paved areas other than designated off-street parking, which exceeds 25% of the allowable lot coverage. So you're already giving somebody 25% of non-permeable. So that's when someone says lot, you know, you've got 50% lot coverage. Well, you're giving them 25% extra though. That's the problem. That's where I have difficulty with this language. And so I've always said, I think at Planning Commission, DRB, that is one of the things in the code audit I most want to talk about and discuss it when we have time to talk about these definitional issues, because that does change trees of what's allowed on a property.
Then what is the difference between that and the Florida area coverage? That's just the building itself?
So that is, yeah, within the walls of the building. So that's floor area, okay, right? Within the envelopes of the structures. Whereas lot coverage is how much of my lot can I cover with building or paved, gravel, decks, all that stuff I read you.
So when we talk about putting a cap on a house that's 2,500 square feet or 2,000 square feet plus a 600 square foot garage or accessory dwelling, what are we talking? Are we talking about?
You're talking about the that's the gross floor area. So that plays as a portion of the floor area, but it also plays as part of the lot coverage because your buildings make up part of that lot coverage.
Okay. For, I guess for my purpose, am I talking about? Okay, so I'm talking about a house, but if I'm talking about a 2,000 square foot house, I'm talking, in my mind, I'm talking about the building.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the porches and the
Right.
patios and the
Yeah.
gravel and all that.
But your building, whether it's a 1-story ranch, if that's a 2,000 square foot, that's going to take up a lot more lot coverage than a 2-story, right? It takes up twice as much if it's a 2-story, one on top, 1,000 on top of another 1,000.
So when we talk about a structure that's 2,000 square feet, we're not only talking about the floor to area ratio, we're talking really about the dimensions on the lot as well, in terms of what kind of house we can build.
It can impact that, yes.
Okay. Totally mud, but
Can I throw one other thing in? What do you consider softscape? Because
Softscape's not defined within our lot coverage.
it kind of negates a driveway if you use softscape.
Well, we give 50% for like grasscrete and things like
Right.
that. Yes, we'll give you a 50% credit towards lot coverage on.
Okay, yeah.
That would be, to me, a discussion in the code audit area when we do get to that, because I definitely want to reverse the requirement so that we are, instead of saying this is how much you can build on, say this is how much we ask or demand that you have as permeable.
Yeah.
Be a heck of a lot easier to
It is a lot,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
So, okay, I'm just curious.
Jeff, I have a question on at section F, talking about case of a building that's been destroyed or damaged. It says that if it's been 50% of the market value or more, that structure may be rebuilt. And then it goes on to say the construction or reconstruction of the structure shall, it seems to me that it says you can conform the setbacks, building height, floor area of the structure prior to the damage, in other words, rebuild it in the same footprint. I think that's what and same floor area. Or you can just build a whole new building that conforms to the current setback and height. So seems like that second option would allow somebody to rebuild it as it was, or ignore how it was and build something else that conforms. I'm not understanding the two different.
So that's basically, that's what the pre-existing currently says. And Commissioner McCarthy had brought this up in a email to me. And the reason I chose you don't have to have B at all, because anyone has that opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? Anyone can build to the current zoning setbacks and requirements. The reason I left that is because that mirrors that pre-existing section, the prior one on the earlier page. And, I don't think it does any harm. It just shows you that it's the other option. Okay, you can build to your pre-existing, or you can, like everybody else, build to a normal. So, we can get rid of it. We can always get rid of that section B. Everyone has that opportunity. So it's up to you.
But let me just expand on this, Mike, is that if somebody had a non-conforming structure, I'm thinking of one on Adams Street that is literally built to a property line.
Yeah.
And they lose 75% of the building during a fire and they want to rebuild it as it was. Don't we still ask them to try and conform? Or do we let them be non-conforming?
You mean with this language or currently?
Currently.
Yeah, so if it's under the percentage that we currently require, yes, they have to. They have to conform. Yeah.
Have to conform. So, okay.
the other thing I mentioned, I think in that email to you, a question I had was in that particular number it is, when a house is destroyed and it's a non-conforming use, and somebody decides, well, I don't want to rebuild, I just want to sell the property to somebody else, then does the ability for that somebody else allow them to build a non-conforming house? Or does the ability to build a non-conforming replacement end with the owner's possession?
Yeah, and the way that it's currently written, it has nothing to do with ownership. So I thought that was a great question. You know, there are other sections of the code and other language that we do put, like uses, non-conforming uses. You have a set time period where if you're not using that pre-existing or non-conforming use in that fashion, then you lose that right to that fashion. Or that use, sorry. So there are examples of that. And I think the other thing that brought up is also that time period thing. So you could always, you have the ability to put those kind of limitations on, you know, those kind of things. So you could say if something's not, whether, I don't know if you could do ownership. I think the ownership would be more difficult thing, but you know, for a time period, if it's burnt down and it's not replaced within a year, then it has to conform, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm not saying that you couldn't do ownership. I could look into that, but those kind of limitations are, you know, I think.
It is what we do with rentals.
Yeah.
Yeah, our STRs require that, for instance, the forever type of STR permits require that those will expire if there's a change in ownership, if it's not kept within the family or within the trust or whatever.
Yeah.
Changes ownership, then that STR permit dies.
Exactly.
So I think we need to follow some of the same procedures with this particular situation.
Interesting. Okay. Do you have any comments, Randy?
I do.
Charge.
I just, what I've heard this evening is that I don't feel comfortable moving forward with this in what we were formerly or fast track. I've seen enough questions raised that I would feel better working this out in the code audit form. And if we were to follow the timeline that Jeff has suggested, it seems fairly quickly that would happen.
Get started
Just
on it.
leave it at that.
Well, Jeff also suggested a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, which is something in addition to just waiting until the code audit is complete. To me, that would help formulating the code after the audit or during the audit. Seems that would be a beneficial meeting to meet with the Planning Commission to address these questions, which I think then could help direct the code audit to the new language.
Absolutely.
Mayor? If you recall, when we started the code audit process, we started out with a joint meeting. And then we talked about, do you want to continue to meet jointly rather than have it go linear as, you know, some other things have gone. So, because by having the joint, you get to hear everybody that's speaking. And then I think we agreed on that. And then we said, well, let's go to try to expedite a couple of issues. Let's get this to the Planning Commission and then get it on to the council. And we've done that. But I think that from a staff standpoint, our understanding was always that we would get back to that joint effort to try to go ahead and maximize what we can accomplish with the code audit. So I think what we were talking about is what you said, late February, early March, that was for a joint meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
So does everybody have the same recollection?
Yep.
Okay, good. Right. So that's
So
we'll do.
when are we talking about possibly having another joint meeting?
We're hoping late February, early March. And so we have some dates that the consultants have sent Bruce and staff, and we're going to have a meeting with them hopefully next week to talk about the timeframe going forward. And so we'll bring those dates to you guys and get those on your calendar.
Yeah, Jeff, also thinking about just the fact that our discussion, let alone adding the planning commission in it, terminologies and visuals, would be really nice to have kind of a walkthrough of how the FIR does create what we have.
Yeah.
And then whatever other
Definitely.
little tidbits and do it, fancy graphic things or.
Might even have models out there.
Well, it's kind of like Lisa did the cubic yard.
Yeah.
And it really made everyone see what that was.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Cool.
Question I have is everybody comfortable moving forward with the language that's in the 178240 non-conforming structures? We're adjusted and got rid of the 80%, 50%, just gone with 50%. Seemed to me that language was in favor with most of the comments and addresses something that used to work but doesn't work now. And I guess I'd like to see us continue, and when we bring this back to formalize the ordinance, included along with the other 2 points that we agreed on.
Yeah.
That is,
I think it needs a little more discussion.
do you?
Because it's still written based on a value system, somewhat. So, I don't know.
Yeah, so
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
no, I was going to just clarify. So when Council Benefield said about bringing it back with the other 2, so the first 2 are already through and signed. So we can and we will bring that back to the code audit discussion at the joint, and we'll do that. That'd be a good time to talk about those kind of things.
Well, I guess there's no urgency to bring this back as a separate ordinance code amendment.
Correct.
If we're going to be looking at this in conjunction with a lot of other issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one point I was trying to make about that 50 to 80% is that, as Jeff had brought up earlier, if somebody just wants to do extensive work to an older home, it's going to, blow past either one of those. And what is it that we'd like to encourage people to do? And for that reason alone, I'd like to revisit it rather than have it move forward as we had talked about.
Yeah.
I think it goes very well for the city if we had that kind of a joint discussion to try to really sort out those kind of issues. It'll help us long-term to get to the right answers. I would urge that we kind of wait until we get to that point and do our process through it. Okay, is everybody comfortable with the fact that we've just now finished or are finishing the first item? Okay, we'll be coming back to this, obviously. This is a long discussion that will be moving up and down for quite a while. So, Chris, what we're saying is that we won't have any further discussion on these items until we get to the joint meeting in February, March. So you won't be seeing it. That's fine. Okay.
Especially as a prelude to what the real important part is, the code audit.
Right. Yeah, it's all code audit. Yeah. Okay. I said, want to make sure you didn't have any expectations between now and then. Okay. Thank you. Next item, Perch driveway easement. Yeah.
All right. The Roberts driveway easement, we've been before you a few times on this. So I just wanted to touch base at this work session to kind of discuss the Roberts property, like for those that haven't seen or have been part of this discussion so far, is on the S curves there. There's an unimproved West and Nana Avenue that the access point right away. And we have brought forward a driveway access easement agreement, a draft form of that for the council This is not the first thing that's been proposed by the Roberts on this property. The Roberts first came before us with a building permit and a elevated roadway, which was met city standards for a roadway. I think there was general discussion and that we didn't really want to see that. And so we are looking at alternative access for this. And so they have been before the Court of Appeals. They've been before LUBA and the Court of Appeals with the original building permit. We had originally denied, and we were upheld at both courts. And it is now in an appeal period on whether they will take that to state Supreme Court. But during that time, they have submitted a smaller building that does meet from at least the first preliminary review on complete application materials. It meets the oceanfront setback standards and would comply with that. And then have turned in a supplementary driveway, which is more towards a grade. And so with that, we have brought forward a driveway access easement that was drafted by our city attorney. And I've come before you to ask if you've got any issues with that driveway access easement. And I know in previous work sessions, they just talked about a few things. One thing, making sure that we have access and to our drain pipes underneath, that it's a non-exclusive grant. And so what we're doing is, and temporary at that, so we're not granting the Roberts exclusive right to this, but we want them to build this, maintain it, and if any damage or anything is done to it, that they would repair that, and it would be up to them to do that as part of this agreement. Then there conversation about the gate, on whether to keep a gate there or not. And my general take so far is to remove the gate from the language, but those are the kind of things that this discussion I was hoping we would have, is to say, how does that agreement look to you? What are the parameters that aren't there, or the parameters that are there that you want to tweak and give direction for Bill Kvaisman, our attorney, on that.
Okay. Who wants to start?
You know, and you talked about Roberts having responsibility for any damage, et cetera, or construction. And is there any consideration being given to having them post a bond to guarantee that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Karen, with Public Works handles, but I know that in most jurisdictions I work, we would require it over a certain amount that anything would be funded. So
Completion of it. And
yeah. So we can look into that.
As I understand it, you're asking for approval, well, not approval, you're asking for a public hearing on the easement, but not anything having to do with what goes on to the easement, right? It's just the easement?
This would be just for the approval of that easement, yes. But you're not approving the building, you're not approving anything further. You're just approving the access, which the way that we have traditionally handled in the city, we require access to a property before we can do a building permit review or any type of review of that permit.
so that's consistent with the way we've handled other applications.
It is, yes. So that's why we're here before you.
So let me try and clarify this for me a little better. When I was listening to what Karen was saying earlier, is the fact that we are trying to get ahead of the easement idea and create the parameters of the easement. We will then give them the parameters saying, okay, now design to fit to these parameters. And they will then come back to us with the design and we will approve whether that fits or not.
Yes, you can, ask for that. So it could be a two-step process, which is, I think, what you're just describing, where first you would like to see the actual easement agreement and approve that. Second, then once you have the specifications and that, then you would get, our engineers and Karen would look over that, but then you could also have that come back for you for your approval.
I think in light of what we've been told, that the Robertsons are now seeking an appeal, asking for an extension, that I don't understand what it is I'm granting an easement for. The possibilities seem quite extensive one way or the other, depending on how they possibly eventually build out there. And if I were to be supportive of granting the easement, I'd like to know how that would be written into it. If you understand my question.
Yeah, so you're saying, okay, if you guys were to go forward with this two-step process we just talked about, and if you agree to the easement and then they're in the process of appealing and they appeal, how does that play out with that first building permit?
Exactly.
Jeff, if they do appeal it to the Supreme Court, Oregon Supreme Court, can the Oregon Supreme Court decide not to hear it?
I think they do for a majority of them. From my understanding, they take very few, just like the National Supreme Court only takes very few. I don't think that.
Bill's on the call.
Bill on the call? Oh,
Bill,
goodness. Yeah, I defer to Bill. So.
There's Bill.
Sorry, Bill.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Nope.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Let's.
Oh,
Bye, Bill.
He's having some issue.
we could hear you
Can you-
earlier, Bill.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So for some reason now my speaker isn't working when I
We can hear you.
in, so I'm gonna be like. Okay, now I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. But Jeff was answering the question right. You're absolutely correct that the Supreme Court is a court of what's known as discretionary review. They choose what cases they're going to take. Historically, they've averaged about 1 out of every 10 cases that are appealed to them. Land use, historically, the average has been lower, more like 1 out of 14 or 15. And that was probably about 10 years ago or so was the last time I saw the numbers. So that may have changed somewhat. So the odds aren't in the Roberts' favor, but there are some questions in this that may make it a little more interesting than the run-of-the-mill case. So we don't know is a simple answer, but yeah, they don't have to take it.
Any idea when we find out whether they're going to take it or not?
Well, the deadline for the Roberts to file their appeal is January 19th. They have asked for an extension of that. The Supreme Court typically grants such an extension. So they're going to file probably mid-February. Then there's about anywhere from 2 to 6 month period where the court reviews whether or not to grant review or not. And so my guess would be by mid next year, we should know whether or not they're going to take review. If they grant review, then they give additional briefing and then decision, and there's no timeline there. Typically that runs about a year and a half. it can't, I've seen it go extend as long as 3 years, but typically it's about 1.5 years from when review is granted. So we're probably talking the end of 2023 if the Supreme Court grants review before we get a final decision. If they don't grant review, we'll probably know by the middle of next year.
Wow.
Why don't we just hold off?
There is no timeline that we must do this later, and I will be providing some response to you dealing with some of the objections you've heard tonight. But yeah, we don't need to grant an easement by the end of January or something. So it does make staff review as things come in a little easier to know for certain that where that access is going to be taken. But there is no timeline. It's got to be right now.
Well, let me ask about what we were talking about a little bit before, was the two-step process of creating the parameters within an easement and then asking them to bring us the design that would then go in that easement. If it gets to a situation where we don't like the design, or the design won't fit our concerns for safety and whatever the transportation aspect of it, does that allow us then to I don't know, rescind the easement? I don't know the wording for that, but.
Sure. So a couple different ways to approach it that I can think of. If in fact it's a matter of it won't meet city standards in terms of how the design is built, say the driveway approach is going to be too steep, or it's not going to be a safe thing, that will be reviewed as part of the review of the driveway itself. And so it's not so much rescission there as much as, the easement, you can grant the easement and let it be governed by the regulatory process. Alternatively, we could include in the easement a clause that requires, here's the easement, Roberts, go design your thing and bring it back to us for review of what that design looks like. And so, we could include that additional step as part of the easement if that's something the council is interested in doing.
That's what I was hoping for, or something along that lines.
Okay.
So in other words, the easement would be contingent on the approval of the driveway or whatever goes on top of it.
Yeah, and so in that situation, approval in two aspects. One, regulatory, your code and public works standards are going to apply no matter where this comes out. But this would add an additional layer of approval where the city council would look at the design and say, yeah, this seems to make sense to us. You're, within the thing, within the boundaries of the easement. And in addition, that the design looks good to us, or no, this retaining wall is too high, or we'd like the retaining wall covered with, I don't know, basalt instead of brick or whatever it may be, but some type of design level review.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Can this easement also be conditioned or require that this be, I don't know if I'm going to say the term, at ground level, or that it be at the southwest corner of their property? Some way so we don't end up granting an easement and then we end up with this sky structure that they proposed first.
We can certainly, I'm trying to think of in terms of the sky structure, I'm fairly certain that, that is, the cost to build that is remarkable. And so, they only propose that because the initial city response is you're going to build out a city street. We want it to city street standards. So we certainly can put some parameters in there. I'd want to talk to Karen and possibly the Roberts a little bit about what makes sense and bring it back to you, because we know that there is some significant variation in elevation, and it may be that there's going to be, some level of built up surface, and whether we're talking about 2 feet or 6 feet, that may make a difference, but we can certainly put in some limitations and say, we don't want it to be above X number of feet.
I think what generated some interest, at least on my part, was the supplemental or alternate drawing sketch they gave us tended to follow grade.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's some way to provide in the conditions that it follow grade, there's within the caveats that you have dips and hills and
we can
to address that. I just don't want to have an easement and they say, oh, we got an easement, now we're going to run it into the second story of the building again.
We can accommodate that. I'll work on putting some changes in to deal with that.
Okay. And of course, everyone knows my feel about the gate. Too many comments from people saying you put a gate on there, that's not a public right of way. Private property, and the city granted private access to public right of way. So if it can be done without a gate and still be made safe, I'd like that to be at least looked at.
We haven't talked about it tonight. I know we mentioned it before, but it's important to note that the reason for the gate was a concern on the part of staff to have people going down a driveway or whatever, which we don't even know what it's going to be like yet. But if it is maybe below what normal standards would be and potentially dangerous, or there's not a turnaround, the idea was to keep people out from that. It was not to keep pedestrians, which can currently go down there, but it was more of a safety issue to not have people drive down there wondering what it is and then not being able to get out.
Well, I'd rather address it as an option to accommodate or address the safety issues rather than going right up front saying there's going to be a gate. I don't know if there's going to be a gate. Maybe it's not going to be required to have a gate. It can be identified as an option to address any safety concerns.
Yeah, and
we worded it that way.
Totally agree. It was just that the discussion was never about making it private for these individuals to have a gate for their driveway. It was the safety side for the public. So that's why it would be considered to be there, and then you can always decide yes or no.
Yeah, it's just the appearance.
I think
It was probably the most pro gate person. I think it's a great idea personally, but I also have realized that we could always add a gate later. And I would say, let's make after the 6th RV has been towed out, we will put in a gate. If they can even tow an RV out of that hill. So
I go ahead and make a park down there.
Yeah.
Also, I think what you're doing by granting a gate is setting a precedence for anything else that might be applied for, where I still go back to Chapman Point, where they wanted a gate and were not allowed to have one because at that time people felt that the whole community should be accessible. And I think it would really hurt people who want to walk down the road to have a gate. What do? Hop over it?
No,
I don't know.
Depend on the design. How you design a gate can be actually welcoming.
But a precedence is really where I'm concerned.
That's understood. I understand your reasoning.
So is there some consensus? It'd be nice to have some direction to bring back. It sounds like maybe a consensus that we don't need a gate at the start, but leave open the possibility for later if it does prove to be a safety concern.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds positive.
Bill, is it a stronger position if we just say no gate? And then as opposed to leaving a string there to maybe a gate? Because I think that the preference is that we don't do it unless there's a really strong need. So I'm just asking that question.
I mean, stronger as opposed to what? And, I think nothing would prevent us from coming back and saying, we now need a gate if there's no mention of it anywhere in the easement. Also, nothing prevents us from saying, no gate, even though it's mentioned as a possibility in there. So, I guess it's really, what's the council's preference?
I just like a stronger position and let them argue for it, or us argue for it, rather than have a breadcrumbs there.
I mean, we can leave the discussion of the gate out entirely and then, approach them later.
Yeah. If we need to, that's fine.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Any other points of the way the Jeff has written out the easement idea? Anything else that somebody wants to?
Jeff, you're going to discuss with Bill the idea of posting a bond.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
And Councilor Benefield, just in terms of posting a bond, is it the bond to, when I deal with bonds, there's typically two different types. One is a, completion bond, another is a maintenance bond, and then there's, more of a long-term bond. I'm assuming you're talking about the long-term bond where we say, you're going to repair and maintain this, and we want them to have that money set aside in bonds so we can call on it if they don't repair and maintain.
That was my consideration when I asked Jeff about it.
Okay.
I hadn't thought about these other two though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, you typically don't see completion bonds in something like this. It's, a subdivision where you're worried the developer might run out of money and you say, tear up the streets and then not repair it. And so you just want to make sure that they finish it.
I'm just concerned about the long-term requirement.
And I made a note for the geologic concerns is how do we write / determine responsibility after an event? Because did the road or the driveway cause the slide, or was it our property behind, that kind of thing? Which would invoke the bond. So I think that we need to assign responsibility somehow with that. So you may see that when it comes back.
Okay.
My other concern is that the city always has the ability to get through whatever is, a built structure, or whether it's at grade or above grade. So as long as that language is forceful, that's what I would be concerned about in terms of protecting our ability to maintain the watering system.
Cover that thought.
I thought that was well worded, so it convinced me, but I'm not a lawyer.
We want to make sure that if another abutting property owner wants access, that they have the right to access that right away.
Okay. I'm thinking I've heard everything. Jeff, do you have anything else you need to know?
Just, would you like this back before you in a another work session or a hearing?
In that regard, is this required to go to a public hearing?
It is under, the granting of an interest in city property has to go through a public hearing process.
Yeah, I'd lost sight of that. That's right.
Yeah, no worries.
I think a hearing would be the next step, because at that point, if we hear a whole lot of stuff coming from other directions, we can then go to a work session and discuss that.
All right.
So I think a hearing is probably the next step. We don't hear anything, we like it, we just go for it.
But I go back to the earlier comment, if we're not going to hear anything possibly for a year or two or three, we need to move on this. We got a lot of stuff on our plate.
Well, in response to Councilor Benefield, that at the very least, I'd like to know if the court was going to take up the case.
That's not going to be for what, another year, just to find out?
Well, actually, they have one date of what, the 19th, and then it will extend,
Yes.
Bill, so.
Yes,
Whether
so
they're at an extension.
Yeah,
But that's
whether they.
to apply.
Yes.
And then it might be another 6 months
No
before they
decision.
make a decision as to whether they're going to take it.
Perhaps that doesn't have a bearing on what we're doing. It makes me feel like, why are we doing this if they themselves are creating a situation to make this process draw out even longer?
Is it possible, to Brandon's point, they could, if we went through our regular process in terms of having a public hearing on the easement, approving the easement with conditions and so forth, and then they come back with a design and we approve the design, then they would be sitting there with a potential driveway into either a smaller house or a driveway with nothing until the Supreme Court decides to make its decision. Now, if they came in and they build a smaller house, of course, then we would have the code audit, which might restrict the size of the house they build anyway. But they could they conceivably demolish that smaller house and build a bigger house if the Supreme Court says it's allowed? I mean, there's all kinds of potential there.
yeah, I do think we could put it, I heard a couple things in there. One is maybe have a piece in there that they can't construct the driveway until they have an approved development. And so, they're not gonna have a driveway to nothing. They've got to have an approved development down there that, before they build it. In terms of, they build the smaller house and 3 years from now, first they'd have to get an approval from the city to approve the smaller house. They build it, and then the Supreme Court says, oh, city, by the way, you can't do the oceanfront setback, and then demolish the existing house and build a new one. I think they could do that. I don't know. It's hard to predict what this would do, but certainly they could. But that driveway would allow access to development down there. We could say no driveway until you get some sort of approved development. But I'm not certain we can go too much further.
They could build the small house and then add to it if the Supreme Court rules in their favor.
Sure.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about ifs and supposing a lot of stuff, there is another direction that they might take. They might see our action towards an easement as a positive and back off on the appeal. That's another if that could happen. I don't know their mind, but this could be a means to proceed.
Brandon, in an effort to try to make sure that we are following our normal procedures as opposed to making special requirements for them, I'm just trying to think in my head, but do you believe that it'd be possible that the terms of the easement would change depending on the Supreme Court action moving forward or not? Or is the easement just going to be the easement and we just get it done?
Good point.
I don't have an immediate answer for you. I would feel best if our interests were protected either way.
Mhm.
And I don't know how to do that. That's just my wish.
That's something we can try to provide then. I mean, when we look at it.
My sense of your question would be that I would prefer the easement to go to either size of house. Because we're not getting the bridge to nowhere kind of thing. We're getting the on-grade preference. Whether they build, the on-grade preference is what I would prefer.
Yeah.
So in that sense, yes, that's.
And Mayor, I think you're dead on. I mean, I think that at least I think Karen would say the same. If they get this easement granted and get an on grade that meets ours and theirs, they're gonna redo whatever design, even if they won the oceanfront setback case, to meet that, because it's much cheaper. It's you know.
And Brandon, I would, shouldn't be talking for when Bill is here, but I would prefer that the city's position be that we took action on something in a normal course of action for a project, rather than have the appearance that we held back the easement because they're going potentially to the Supreme Court. And so if it won't change one way or the other, then my advice would be to move forward with the easement, have it in place, but get as much protections in it as we can.
And yeah, and I didn't hear that anything that suggested that, well, we're not, because they're going to the Supreme Court, we're not going to give it to them. It's more, they're going to the Supreme Court, that's going to stretch the timeline out more, let's give more time to think about it, so.
Yeah, Bill, I agree. My comment was that someone could make the argument or the appearance that, there was a quid pro quo on that, and there's not. So
Yeah.
just trying to avoid the appearance.
Yeah, no, as always, do the right thing, and, we'll take it from there.
Yep.
At that, last chance for comments. I'll move on here. Okay.
Just have a question. Are we talking about bringing it back then to February? Jeff, can we get it done in that time?
That's more Bill than me.
Oh, but the hearing notice, I would have to have my hearing notice out today.
Oh, no, then
So we would have to
March.
do March.
We'll do March.
Once we do a public hearing.
But you all know it'll be March.
Okay.
Okay.
That's always a level out here. Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Bill.
thanks. Good night, all.
Okay, next item. Jeff. Fine.
Oh, see why, goodness. I thought there was a game to watch. Wait a second.
It's not that easy.
I'm gonna go watch the tape again. So, sorry about that.
Yes, Jeff had a really good night.
Yeah, too good, actually. Well, I can't get too good. So, this is TSP update. A couple things. We've just got the draft yesterday. I think it was the tech memo 6 is what it's called, but it is the preferred alternatives that we've had feedback or came before you guys kind of with some of the concepts. Got feedback from the public on with the open house thing. So that document is at staff level right now. We're also had a meeting today with the consultants and the project management team, setting out the timeline for completion. We're setting the next PAC meeting and the next public engagement for hopefully the first week of February. So we'll be scheduling that around that time period, probably tomorrow, and then get the notice out for that. That tech memo will be part of that. So that preferred alternatives will be part of that kind of presentation and discussion. And so then the target is to get it into adoption, the TSP into the draft document, another round of public outreach in the April time period with adoption April and May. And that's from the discussion, we'll see. I'll be getting that kind of timeline document this week. And so I'm going to go over that with Bruce, and then we'll bring that before you guys for those kind of dates and scheduling. And so, but it's coming, to a conclusion. The preferred alternative, I think, is a good. It's a good looking document. Incorporates all those different improvements with 3 different stage kind of timeline and funding options. So, a lot going on with that, and I think that's going to be, it's going to make for a busy spring, bringing everyone together on that.
Very good. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Any questions or?
Nope.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, now we move on to our systems development discussions. Karen's coming up.
Thank you. As you know, the Oregon law provides a framework through which municipalities can establish system development charges to pay for capital improvements. Per state law, allowed capital improvements are facilities or assets used by water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, or parks. Currently, the city of Cannon Beach imposes SDCs on the following utilities: water, wastewater, and stormwater. The methodology for water and wastewater was last updated in 2003, and the methodology for storm has remained unchanged since 1996. The Public Works Department budgeted $45,000 for this long overdue project and conducted an RFP process to hire a consultant in late 2020. FCS Group's proposal was selected based on the company's expertise in the field, taking into account the city's positive experience with this team on the past utility rate study that was done for council. City Council has been able to hear from the consultant group 3 times at the October work session and the December business meeting and work sessions. Public input has been received on this topic, and council now has the opportunity to discuss the proposed SDC changes in greater detail. A draft of the recommended ordinance is included in your packet based on the discussion to date, as well as the proposed municipal code updates in both the final version and a marked version showing the changes. Recommendation would be to provide feedback and direction to staff on the draft ordinance and code revisions, and staff will bring these back to the council for a vote during the February 1st meeting. I do have Doug here from FCS. If you have any questions that you want to present to Doug and his team regarding the report and some of the public feedback we've gotten, Doug is online for you.
Okay, so we have, I guess the first thing I would like is just a clarification of the difference between what the ordinance is and what the resolution is.
Okay, and again, Doug, you might have to help me on this. These are recommended, this is the first time we've gone through this, of course, myself and my staff. And so we leaned on Doug to be able to give us some sort of guidance on both of these, not knowing how this comes forth to you. And so these are drafts that Doug helped us put together to be able to present to you. Again, based on the discussion so far, they can be revised if discussion leads to some changes.
Hi, Doug, how you doing?
Good evening.
Okay. Any concerns, questions, points of interest?
I had a question about population fluctuations in the various studies that you had anywhere from 1652 population for Cannon Beach in 2020 to 1922 population in 2020. And I'm wondering, wouldn't that affect the proposed fees based, since this is based on population? And here we have, I mean, our last census said that our population was something like 1491. So I'm just wondering why the fluctuation in population, probably because each study had a different estimate of population. But it seems to me that if you're going to make a base a fee on population, that you should have the same population for each segment of the charge.
Not true. What's more important is that you have a consistency between the project list and whatever population growth estimate used. So, forgive me if you're going to experience a little deja vu here, because these are precisely the same issues that we discussed last month. And so I may be using some of the same explanations. But SDCs are typically based upon master plans. The master planning process, as you are currently perhaps experiencing with your TSP, begins with some estimate of what kind of growth a municipality will experience. And then a list of projects is developed to facilitate and accommodate that growth. And a system development charge is simply variable number 2 divided by variable number 1. It's not so, the reason, and I know it seems counterintuitive, but it is still true, that it doesn't matter so much that the estimate of growth is accurate, and it matters even less that they are consistent across different utilities. That matters not at all. What's important is that estimate of growth, however accurate or inaccurate it may turn out to be, was taken to engineers and said, develop a project list to accommodate this growth. And what we're after is that project list divided by that growth. Now, if you somehow had perfect foresight and had a different population growth estimate, you would end up with a different project list. And so my contention with some of the feedback that you've been getting is that, sure, feel free to pursue more accurate estimates of growth, but don't stop there, because if you change the denominator, you better change the numerator as well. So if you're going to use a different growth estimate, make sure the project list is revisited and revised accordingly, because you can't just say, oh, I think we're going to have a small fraction of this estimated growth and we'll keep the project list the same, or we're going to have double this growth and keep the project list the same, because that's not a valid approach. Does that make sense?
Sure.
It does to me.
Yeah, Doug, let me ask another question about, I'm sure you covered it last time. What we are establishing for a system development fee for whichever category is a maximum that we should not exceed, correct?
That is very correct. Yes.
Now, so if, say we then choose 75% of the maximum, we pick a number down there, and then a couple of years down the road, we say we want to go to 80%. That's okay to do, isn't it? We can do that along the way, or once we
yes, you can, but there would need to be a little process.
Okay.
Meaning you would not need a new methodology. You would not need to hire another consultant to do any calculations for you, but you would still want to offer the 90-day notice and a public hearing,
right,
to actually raise the fee. Anytime you raise your SDC in a manner that is not strictly constrained by a cost index, you need to provide that process. But if you're still operating under the last maximum that was calculated, you don't need new methodology.
Well, even though we want to hire you just because you're so clear and succinct.
I know the temptation is so strong. I absolutely get it.
Thank you. That clarified my only question.
I believe you had a question about what is the difference between the ordinance and the resolution?
Kind of. I know that's process. I was just figured it would get there sometime. Okay.
Would you like me to address that?
Please.
Yes.
So the normal management of the system development charge program is kind of precisely what has been presented to you. The ordinance, which typically gets codified into a city's code, is the kind of the enabling legislation that governs the SDC program for a city. It's funny, you know, if you read the state law, this is ORS chapter 223. You read the state law about system development charges, you will see a very common refrain, like the chorus of a song. It constantly comes back to the words, the ordinance or resolution governing SDCs shall, and then it will give some requirement for what should be in the ordinance. The state law is really about setting forth the requirements and a little bit of the flexibility for what goes into the local ordinance. But it is the local ordinance that governs the system development charge. And so what you have here is language that revises your ordinance. Your ordinance is actually quite good. And really all we're doing to it in the red line version, and I helped provide that red line version, is we're just making sure that you reserve to yourselves the authority to impose a transportation system development charge, because that was left out. And so that's it's kind of routine housekeeping on the ordinance side. The resolution is what you would do to implement individual changes in your SDCs, whether you're adopting an SDC methodology or actually imposing new fees. That is typically all done by resolution. And the ordinance itself will say City Council can adjust these SDCs by resolution from time to time.
Oh, nice.
So Doug, just for clarification, is because the population number has been a big topic of discussion. When you say that if we wanted to kind of pursue a tweaking of that, are you suggesting that we would need to go back and have our water and wastewater master plans amended to show that population change? Because that's what's reflected in there as well, which would become somewhat of a domino effect because those projects were predicated on that data. Am I understanding you to say that that would be a necessary thing when you talk about our project list, because that's driven based on that information in those master plans?
So I think the accurate answer to your question is no, I would not recommend that. I have never recommended to any client, any city, go redo your master plan. I am not in a position, I'm not an engineer, I'm not in a position to judge a master plan. And so it would be utterly inappropriate for me to say this is wrong, go fix it.
Okay.
I think just from an educational perspective, what I think we're learning here is a lot of the questions that have been raised in the context of setting SDCs are really questions being raised about the master plan. And I hope one of the enduring legacies of what we are going through here these past few months is that when master plans get brought forward for adoption, people pay more attention to them at that time when questions can be answered by the people putting the master plan together, which is probably far more constructive. And they will be more willing to do that, knowing that that master plan can later become the basis of SDCs. So when someone like me comes along and uses it to populate the calculations. But by the time someone like me comes along to do those calculations, it's too late at that point to really to redo. You would not want to redo a master plan. Now, having said all of that, I would be remiss if I did not point out that the law does not require someone who imposes SDCs to be loyal to a master plan. And so we've had clients that are that their master plan, whatever utility we're setting SDCs for, they're so old and out of date And they have this sense that they're missing out on SDC revenue, but they're not going to be able to pull off a master planning effort for another couple of years. Well, there's no requirement that we use the last master plan. We can actually kind of roll our own assumptions, coming up with a project list and growth assumptions independently. And we get staff's help with that. And as long as staff feels confident in the growth assumptions that we can agree on and the project list that we come up with, then there's nothing preventing you from doing that.
And just for council's clarification or just your comfort level, when the Parks Master Plan was developed, there were not dollars associated with those projects at the time. When we provided the dollars to Doug, we went through the same process as we would have with any of the other master plans, and that was to reach out and get estimates on those. There's not many of our master plan projects that would require formal engineering, and that's what drove a lot of our water and wastewater cost estimates. But we were still able to get estimates from people that would potentially do this work for us so that we can give him some accurate numbers.
Thank you.
Brandon?
Yes, I guess my first question would be, I guess, in response to Mr. Neal's question about recovering the engineering costs, the $900 per system development fee. How is that? I guess the methodology was based on population, if I'm understanding this correctly.
So we're conflating a couple of different issues here. The costs we're talking about are the costs of calculating an SDC methodology. Is that what we're talking about?
I believe so.
Okay. So Mr. Neal's objection is that the what we're calling compliance costs, the cost
I'm sorry, I misspoke about engineering.
Oh, it's okay. So these compliance costs, the principal complaint here is that the cost of compliance as a portion of the whole SDC is excessive. That's the complaint, and that's ultimately the city council's prerogative to determine if that's true or not. As with other portions or components of the SDC, we are here to set a maximum defensible charge, and then the city council is free to charge anything at or below that level. So for the compliance costs, we use the cost of this very study that we are in the middle of, and we divided it by the number of utilities, and we said, okay, we're going to do this every 5 years, so 1/5 of it per year, and then multiply that by the number of years in whatever planning period for each utility, and that the number of years was the variable that was slightly different in each one of the utilities. But that creates a total compliance cost that is then divided by whatever metric is being used to describe growth, and that ultimately comes back to population in certain cases, and so that is what gets charged. And if that total compliance cost smells like it's too much relative to the SDC, the city council is certainly fair not to say you don't have to charge all of it or any of it. We're here to tell you what you can legally do, and the compliance costs, they're not sort of a plus tax on the SDC. It's not a commission. It's not a tip. It has nothing to do with the other projects in the SDC. It is independently calculated, and so even though it may look funny, it's valid.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I have another question. This probably is more for Karen. In the resolution part, will you be coming forward with values that you are proposing for the STCs?
Can, if that's what you'd like me to do.
That's what the resolution does.
Yeah.
Section 3.
This resolution is based on the discussion so far, and I can modify what's in here to the level that you're desiring. Or like Doug says, any subset of that, and I can bring that back to you as a red line change here if you'd like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of that's kind of why I asked that initial question is what what the consultants are presenting is the maximum.
Okay.
I'm not comfortable with the maximums. I think we should provide the opportunity for an ease in kind of situation. I don't know what the lower where to go.
Okay.
But I'm just thinking that we should kind of give future council a chance to say, okay, that wasn't quite enough, or maybe it was too much, and work it. So starting with the maximum kind of doesn't give them leeway.
Right.
So
can you give me an idea of a time frame that you like? Do you want this over a 5-year period, a 3-year period, longer?
I wouldn't give it a time period. I would just say, what value are we comfortable with? Yeah, below the maximum.
Right, but for something for today, and then without setting and saying, well, the next time we adjust, it's going to this.
Okay.
Other people can decide that.
Understand.
Correct, Sam?
Correct.
Okay.
Make sense, everybody? Now, again, I don't know, because I'm thinking about the fact that, the population number is an easy one too, because we know the difference. When the population number was set by the previous census at 17 something, whatever systems development charge we're talking about in the category, that's that section of time. And that's when we were working on it. Now we know that it's less. Maybe we should use that value of difference to break us down to a lesser number of some sort. I don't know. That was just kind of an idea.
Of course, there was concern that the census itself was inaccurate.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole nother component to it, and that is, since our system development charges are paid by people that are developing, 75% of the homes in this community are second home owners. They have nothing to do with the census. So I guess it's a philosophical question for us. How do we want to recoup this money to pay for needed infrastructure, even though we know that the population isn't really what's driving the need?
I guess, again, it's that we don't know question that you're asking.
We do know for certain that 75% of the houses in this community are second homes.
Yeah.
The other side of this is a lot of the population is driven by the number of tourists that are here that are using the water and sewer streets and so forth. So it's not just number of homes or just our base census. So I think we still need to make a judgment. Make sure our SDCs are sufficient to cover the anticipated growth that our master plans are saying we have to have. And rather than looking at, well, gee, we only have this many houses, that's where it goes.
I guess that is my point that I'm trying to make, is that to accommodate what we need a higher SDC fee.
Okay.
Not a lower one.
Okay.
No, that's my conclusion from looking at all this also.
I think a way to look at it is that this is a way to capture the contribution created by the growth. And what happens is that if you don't charge what you can charge, then we don't capture the full cost of that in the SDC. Everybody that's already here has to pay that difference. And so it's not a matter of saying, well, we don't want somebody who's coming in new and have to pay $4,000 or whatever. It's, well, if they pay $3,000 to however many houses it is, then we will have to make up the difference in rates for everybody else to pay for that growth. So it's kind of a hard balancing, but there is a consequence to saying, well, we won't charge as much here because we're saying we'll charge it to the existing residents.
Doug, have you seen this in other municipalities that you have supported in this process where they selected a lower number from the maximum that was presented, and what was the fallout of that?
So that does happen all the time. And there are a lot of municipalities that are concerned about their competitiveness with nearby municipalities. And so they won't necessarily want to be, they want to be friendly to growth and development and don't want to discourage it. And so they will suppress their SDCs so that that growth will happen. Now, whether that actually impacts a siting decision or anything, I'm skeptical, but yes, that decision is made all the time.
And to make up that difference, does it fall on the ratepayers in the community to pick up that difference? Is that how that works?
Oh, absolutely. And that's for utilities for which there is a rate. Now, if we talk about things like transportation and parks, then you start looking forward to that GO bond, because there are fewer options.
Right. Sam, to your point about, bringing you back something that would allow us to have some sort of a progression over some time, we do have an opportunity here is that when Jeff presents you the transportation plan for whatever projects come out of that, we would want to try to go back and amend this so that we could include those projects. That may be a great time for us to be able to pick up, that would be our next leap, if you will, in progression. So timing of that may be beneficial to the council, be able to take a look at it again. So I can bring you what that might look like.
Ready?
I do have a question on the Nakus Park figure. Can you tell us where that came from? I mean, it came from the parks plan, but what did that include? What kind of development? Is that just the complete Cannon Beach Elementary School project, or is it the park?
The park itself.
Okay, so what is going to cost that much for the development of that?
Well, part of that building is that's in the park, and I'll go back and look and see what we drilled down on for Doug, but I won't say the entire building was in that because I don't think the entire thing qualified under what Doug had kind of given us the breakdown for. So let me look at that and then send you a note through Bruce that tells you kind of what that included. It's been a while since we've done all these.
It seems like a lot. I thought, well, that would be almost the entire Cannon Beach Elementary School.
Yeah, I think a lot of the projects, and I know Doug got a lot of pushback from me, just like you guys are getting from the community, because it was hard for me to grasp the qualifications for some of these projects. And they may cost the city a lot more money, but hardly any of that qualified under this. So we got very little benefit, if you will, through this process for some of the projects. But like Doug said, it was predicated on the growth factor. And in a lot of these projects, we're not increasing capacity, or we're not, the reason we're doing it is not to be able to address additional population. And so I kind of challenged him in that regard as well. In the NACUS project, there was some capacity opportunity there because it became a gathering place. And so there was a factor associated with the fact that we would have people gathering there. People would be able to come there and experience that when this project got done, whether it was community gardens, the buildings itself or whatnot. So giving that whole thing to Doug and letting him go through the qualifications and tell me what component of that qualified under what the state's laws are is what the residual outcome of that was.
But I think that the project that you're looking at is $1.23 million, and
the total,
but that is,
but it doesn't mean the whole thing qualified for that. And again, that's where I'll go back and take a look.
Just wondering what
the
that is.
fallout of that was.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is, and if I may, this is a good reminder that this is something that I kind of have a responsibility to remind you about before you finish your discussion of if you're only going to be charging a fraction of what you can charge, you must keep this in mind. And that is just taking the parks SDC by itself, just for illustration purposes. The total project list, the total of things that you plan to build in the forecast period is about $2.9 million. Of that, only 372,000 end up in the cost basis of the SDC, which means that if you charge the full parks SDC that we are calculating, you will still need to get $2.5 million from other sources for your projects. So my advice to you as a financial dude is, before you decide to cut back your SDC, think about where you're going to get the money for the portion that is not SDC eligible before you start cutting back your SDCs.
And isn't that also kind of an assumption that you're earning the development charges totally?
Yeah, that's right. That's assuming that all of the growth shows up as planned.
Right.
That's right.
So there you go. I guess the only thing I'm not really overly concerned about it, but my sense is, if I were a future city council, I would have liked to have had some leeway to go up or down. If we start at the max, you're done. And I suppose, okay, that's
For how long?
well, until we have a new consultant come in and give us a whole new systems development process, which means new master plans.
Do remember that anything that can be done with a resolution can be undone with a resolution.
True.
So even if you decided to go to the maximum now, you're just one city council meeting away from completely undoing that.
So Doug, just to be clear on that, if we were to pursue funding for one of these projects that qualified in here, say grant, federal funding, state funding that maybe came our way that we were not aware of as of today, and we were to get that funding, then we could go back and make our adjustments, because the SDCs would be a lesser component of that, because now we have another funding source. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. And what you're saying may or may, well, it would not be necessary. And furthermore, even if you knew about the grant in advance, it's not entirely clear whether it would have an impact on your SDCs. So let's take, for example, the NACUS, that project, because we're having fun talking about it. That's a total cost of 1.2 million. and just a hair under $350,000 in the SDC cost basis. So let's say you get a grant for that. The amount of the grant is all important here. If the amount of the grant is $500,000, then you have plenty of ineligible portion to soak that up, and that won't affect your eligibility. If, on the other hand, you got a grant to do the whole project and you knew about it in advance, then you would kind of have an obligation to remove that project from the project list, because it would be kind of disingenuous if you knew you were going to get it funded outside the city.
Right. I guess I'm referring to federal funding that could be coming our way as a discussion for infrastructure improvement. So I was, instead of the NACUS Park, I was more focusing on the water projects and how they were calculated in here. If I got federal funding that I didn't expect, you know, what would trigger me going back and saying, let's make the adjustment now that we got this other money. I'm more likely to get federal funding for water and wastewater than I ever would the NACUS project.
Okay, so
Right.
so if it's funding that you weren't, that was kind of speculative or competitive, and there was no way for you to really be sure about it in advance, there's really no obligation to recalculate your SDCs. What's more common that ends up with that kind of adjustment is when there's a project that's sort of discretionary and the city says, we will not do this project if we don't get a major grant for it. And that is a case where you definitely want to make some kind of adjustment for it.
Okay. That helps me when I bring something back to you and potentially come our way, you know?
Yeah, interesting.
But always feel free to use any kind of grant money or outside funding on the non-eligible portion first.
Right. No, of course. Yep. Okay.
This isn't confusing at all. No.
I know. I told you it was complex.
Oh, okay. Get the cows. Yeah.
Okay.
In theory, if,
Any other questions for Doug while we have him on?
well, I think I heard this, if we were to take a lesser SDC charge, as time goes on, we may find ourselves having to make up increased rates to make up for that difference. Okay. I want to make sure I understood that.
Yep. Which, by the way, is a trade-off that cities make all the time.
Yeah. Okay, then. Anything else you need from us, Karen?
I'm just clarifying that you want me to bring a value based on a more accurate population and what that would look like for us to potentially ramp that up over some course of time.
We aren't going to change any populations.
Okay.
No, the populations have to stay as they are, or
Not changing them, Bruce, giving us a difference between what the master plans tell us, what today might be, so that we have a logical suggestion for a lesser amount to discuss.
That's how I understood your request. I just want to make sure I was straight on that.
That's all I was asking for, was just so I could, that was the only number I could think of that would relate. You know, we could say, oh, let's just do half, but that doesn't make any, there's no logic for going to that. The population was the only logical number I could come up with. I'm hearing a little bit more of an idea to go to the max, but I would just like to see what that number would be. Okay.
Mhm. Okay, so we don't bring you a resolution that has numbers in dollars. We bring you information that says this is the delta between what the master plan used and what the 1489 is, I think, the number now. And that's all that you want.
That's worth a discussion. I think.
Okay, all right, good, that's fine.
Okay.
We have direction.
Are you okay with that?
I understood you want to be able to look at this model before I make it changes in the ordinance or resolution. Is that correct?
We're not going to change anything in the ordinance or resolution.
Right, good. I just.
I'm actually comfortable move ahead with the ordinance as soon as possible, because the resolution could then happen.
Right.
So,
Right. I'll
Okay.
look at
Work
these.
session for next month?
sure. If try and get all the numbers together, but yeah.
Is that a big ask, Karen?
Not with Doug's help, it won't be. I'll probably work with Jeff to make sure we're all on the same page of those numbers that we're talking about, what we feel we know to be the accurate, and then we can launch off of that.
I think Doug thinks he's.
And then Doug, you have a furrowed brow, so I want you to speak up.
I am concerned that, and maybe I've misunderstood, but it sounds like we want to recalculate the SDCs based upon a different denominator. In other words, different growth assumptions, but the same numerator.
No.
Okay, good.
What I'm asking for is just a value somewhere below the maximum. And the only way I could come up with a logical value was to take the new census number and give us what Bruce called a delta between the maximum that you've created and what might be, and that, from what I can tell, it's less than 20%. It's not much for the difference between 1,700 and 1,400.
Right.
But it would give us some place to say, okay, here's the maximum that we've created.
Oh,
And here's a possible lesser number. Does that make sense?
I got you.
Doug, we're not changing,
Changing
we're not changing the population number in the study.
I'm with you.
It's just a place that if suppose it turns out that the current population is 20% lower than what the study said, we'll take the max and take off 20% and say that's our starting point. We aren't going to plug in that number anyplace else.
Okay.
It's a way for the council to set a number. It's a methodology they want to try.
Okay, so it sounds like it's sort of a side calculation.
It
Yes,
is.
yes.
Yeah, it is.
I'm on board.
And then Doug, along with that, I would want to be able to bring them the ramifications, if you will, of starting there as these projects get executed and completed. When we start looking at that difference, the difference between those two numbers, and have to be looking at rate changes. I want to be able to kind of give them all the pros and cons of what we're putting out on this table here.
Okay, well, you and me and Zach, we'll put our heads together and I'm sure we'll come up with something lovely.
Okay.
Hi, Zach.
Yep.
Hi, Zach.
Sorry, we didn't ask you anything.
Yeah.
He's smiling. Look at that smile.
Yeah.
Good meeting for him.
Made him happy.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks,
You're
folks.
certainly welcome.
Okay, and thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Yep, you're welcome.
Covered both items. We can jump straight to the barnyard. Yeah. Short break before we wake up Rick, okay? Okay, we're going straight into our warning system, cows, and I will turn it over to Rick.
Thank you guys for having me here. And you guys have amazing durability right now. You guys have been working since early today. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk a little bit about the cow system, and I will try to be brief. Chief Reckman and myself started talking about the cows and what their position was in late October of last year. And we started talking about the relevance of it and what does it mean to us, and then where would we like to see it going. And with that being said, the board themselves made a pretty rapid decision recently. So the Canada Beach Rural Fire Protection District owns the cows. They're the ones that developed them in 1994, 95. And recently they decided to stop supporting the program. And we never really had a chance to dive into a deep dive to bring this conversation to you guys. What Mark and I were doing over this last couple months during the holidays is we were doing some research and contacting vendors and talking to past consultants and people that were working on the systems. And then I've always had an idea of what I would like to see happen with the program itself. And then recently the fire board made a quick decision about not supporting it. I sent you guys some things in the packet, and it's stuff, if you're not covering it all the time, it might be a little bit foreign. So the key that I wanted to talk about tonight very briefly was in 1995, when they actually had the CAL system implemented, what was the emergency notification system and what gap was it filling? So in 95, all they had in the country was an emergency alert system, the EAS, and it basically did emergency notifications on TV and radio. And the CAL system really did have a huge part in outside notifications for people in this community. And in 2006, the Integrated Public Alert Warning System was developed, IPAWS. And that started basically taking modern technology and using all those technology formats and platforms and having the ability to communicate with people across the country in those formats. So the CAL system had a much smaller part to play in the notification system in all communities. And that's maybe why a lot of communities on the coast didn't start them, or they didn't do anything with them. And it's kind of makes sense a little bit what happened with the system here in Cannon Beach, because it just wasn't utilized. And so it had a smaller part to play. The one thing that's interesting about that smaller part to play is it's a redundant system that's very valuable. It's a standing resource. It's very valuable, but it needs to be upgraded and developed to where it can really be a part in the IPAWS system. And there is a value to it that it's different technology, because if that other technology fails, that will be present. And so it has a very, very important part to play. It's smaller than in the past, but it's very critical. So our current sirens, there's a total of 5 sirens in the city of Cannon Beach and 2 in Arch Cape. And our sirens are located at First and Larch, Ocean and West Washington, Sunset and Spruce right at the fire station, South Hemlock and Nebraska, and Orford and Pacific. Those are the locations of the sirens in the city that are currently being, and I'm not sure if everybody's had an opportunity to see them or go through them, but they're very interesting and strategically located in the city. They cover the downtown and midtown areas in 3 different locations. And as you see by those pictures that are on the screen right there, they do have different sirens of different technology that are there, and they have all the same purpose of which way they project the sounds out of. And they also have these in Talavana. The siren that you see on the right there at Orford, that actually is the one that needs some replacement and needs to be fixed, and that's something that we can talk at a different date. But what I wanted to get into with you guys, and this is what I wanted to send to you guys, and this is what the research that we were able to come up with in November, was this system, which is a standing resource. There's a maintenance portion and there's an upgraded portion that you need to deal with. And some of these things are unanswered. Matter of fact, many of them are, but they're not a mystery. These are not unknown technologies, and these are not known price tags. It's a matter if you can find them and integrate them with the current system that you have. So on maintenance, there's batteries, radios, speakers, and annual inspections. The fire department's fire protection district did have a budget for that annually, and I just don't think it was adhered to or really necessarily paid attention to very much unless something didn't work. And so it's an unknown if they were actually using it and how much was that maintenance cost that they were dealing with. They know what the numbers are, but it's not like it was ongoing and really scheduled, and it wasn't being managed as something that they needed because they weren't really using the system very much. Then there's upgrades. There's upgrades that I think are very critical to where I would support the program. And those are software upgrades, linking hardware upgrades, and software that goes and brings the system into the modern age, the IPAWS. And it allows it to be also controlled not only manually locally, but also at an integrated dispatch center, to where now you're talking about not a local concept, but a regional concept. And then a replacement of some other parts that may or may not be aware of us now. So with those, I've listed some recommendations up here at the top of the system. And I did have an opportunity to sit in the fire board meeting last night. And they were very gracious to give me a platform to talk about what my intentions were. And they were very glad that we were talking about it this evening. And I also did tell them that I haven't had a chance to really talk to you guys about this and where you want to head with this program. But I did talk to them a little bit about what I wanted to do and what directions that where they are is where they need to get off the platform of what they're at right now. And they're having a challenge for managing the system ongoing, and they're looking for support. They really are. And if you have any questions, Chief Reckman's been here tonight to answer those questions, but I do have some recommendations that I would move forward. But before I get into recommendations, I'd like to get some feedback from you guys. Any questions?
I think, well, Alea was the one that put this all together, and he's just synonymous with Cannon Beach. So I feel real strongly that we need to keep it going. And when we had our tsunami in spring vacation, I know that the people that were here during that time were really saved, or they got to do a good practice because they heard it all over. And I think sometimes you don't have your cell phone with you. You know, it's just a really important thing for us to continue.
And Robert, I agree. But Rick, would you go back? I think it's to the second slide. Where you've got the, right there. Because part of what we're asking y'all to consider is that the cow system was extremely important back, at the time frame that we have for the tsunami. But in 22, there are other technology reliant things that theoretically can replace cows. But if there's any problem with the technology, then you don't necessarily have an outdoor warning system. And so that is kind of a policy question that, do we want to get involved with, management of that, what will the relationship be with the fire board, those kind of things. But Rick, I think, has pulled together some really good information saying that if somebody wants to continue it, whoever that is, these are the potential costs. If we let it go, then we have to rely on the technology solutions. And again, somebody may have a cell phone, they may not, and they may see a bunch of people running, but they won't know why. So that's part of the discussion tonight.
And do you remember when we all had to go to Seaside to have our cell phones work? Yeah, in the Cove. For 13 days, we did not have service.
Yeah, no, I don't think I was here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It was a big deal.
Was that 07?
Huh?
Was that 07?
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
And it's an example of, we're using older technology to build an emergency backup radio system with ham and GMRS. Why do we do that instead of dealing with the public safety radios? Because if they go down, we have an alternate resilient path. This is very important to maintain it, but it's also to get it to a next level and integrate it with the iPod system. That's in my opinion, that's almost as important as the cows existing themselves. Is it integrated? Because when you have Seaside has the ability right now, and they cover Gearhart, and they work with an MOU with Gearhart to maintain it, and they have it integrated with their 911 system. If we adopted that same type of model, now you'd have an integrated system that can go all the way, actually closer to Falcon Cove or Arch Cape, all the way up to Gearhart, and you have the same system. Now you have something that's not local, but it's regional as well. And that's one of the biggest parts with emergency management preparedness in this entire county is everything's been done regionally, locally. And if it's not done regionally and considered to be a regional concept, then everything fails. And so it's very important to look where these technologies came from and to maintain them, but also integrate them into the future. But there is a cost to that.
And Rick, I think that you had told me that when we're talking about regional versus local, is that the county, which would be a normal regional player for something like this, is not interested in cows where it plugs in. They're going to rely on the technology.
That's correct. And one thing that's interesting about the state of Oregon is not all coastal counties and not all coastal communities are as high as risk as maybe Clatsop County. They may not have the population range as maybe this county does near Astoria and other areas. So it may not benefit them with 400 people in their town to have a COW system, which is costly. It costs money to maintain it. They may not have a government structure around them, very similar to Falcon Cove, that they can build up a resource to do that. So it's not a statewide resource. And that's really why the state and the county don't put a lot of faith in it, is because it's not up and down the state entirely. The one thing that's interesting about this county is they have quite a bit of this resource here, as long as they're interconnected. Currently, the state and the county don't support this system, but that's an ongoing conversation. If local areas get together and they build these programs, then it's something that they can actually utilize and have a policy and have a way, a structure to actually stand on.
How readily, excuse me, how readily available is the equipment and ability to make repairs on this? Because as I understand it, it can break down pretty easily.
It can, and that's a great question. The representative of Wayland is going to come here mid-February. He's going to do a system-wide review on the whole system, and he's also going to be going up to Gearhart and looking at their new system, which is still in pallets and not realized, just to find out what technology, what equipment do they actually need, and can we get this equipment? And one thing that's interesting about this equipment is it's outdated, but new equipment does exist for it. You just have to find it. And then you have to look at in the future and say, okay, maybe we stop using that specific equipment, but we use the gear and the concept, and then we update it. I don't think that's been done for 20 years. And so that's why that stuff's so hard to find. It's not the fact that there's not some type of replacement. It's maybe replacing 40-year-old equipment. But can equipment be brought in that's a little bit newer and modernized at maybe even a less cost and easier to find to look into the future to put it in place? And I don't have an answer for that, but they're constantly reinventing new ways to fix things. And I have a lot of confidence that they use these around the world. It's not just here. So you can find this stuff. It's just a matter of, what are you looking for? Is it 40 years old or is it 4 years old?
Is this kind of like going into the junkyard and trying to find the engine that fits your 1954 Buick?
It is, but do you have to have the 54 Buick, or can you get a 74 Buick? Can you change it a little?
That's what we're doing now.
That's what we're doing now. And that's where I totally respect the fire district's challenge, is they've been trying to continually build the 54 Buick. And one thing that's nice about some of the contractors is some of the electrical contractors that have been working on this that are locals and very good friend of ours, they've done some great upgrades, and some of those upgrades were never really utilized. And so they're there. Some of the upgraded technology that we're talking about actually already exists. It's just never been turned on and put together. And so it's not that big of a leap to get to where we're going. But to get rid of a $250,000 standing resource is something that I'm glad we're taking the time to have a conversation to talk about.
Rick, do you have any figures just to give us an order of magnitude on what the cost is?
I do. I put that in the document that I briefed for you. And then tonight, each one of these units has 4 to 6 or 4 6-volt batteries, and they're about $250 to $300 each. And they have a 5 to 6 year lifespan. So if we replaced all of them today at once, it would cost us $6,000. The likelihood of having to do that's limited. And they would also have a 5 to 6 year lifespan. The radios and motherboards are about $2,000 to $3,000 a piece, and that's $15,000. So if you had to completely swap out all of the radios, motherboards, and batteries of this, you're talking about $21,000. Now, the crane rental is about $2,500 for a day, and that could be specifically a big cost if you couldn't organize this for a limited period of time. The equipment that it would take to honestly do a software linking to match what Seaside's doing is about $30,000. And I don't think that's amortized over 5 years. I think that's an overall basic cost of what it is. It costs $65 annually per sites, 5 sites. So it's $320 annually. And with that being said, you're talking about, if you broke that all down into a maintenance plan over a year, you're talking about a $10,000 budget a year to break this down. Could that cost you upfront money of $20,000 to $30,000 to replace big items right away? It could. Depends on our evaluation from the Wayland specialist.
What are the cost of the bigger components like the speakers and connections?
I don't have the details of those little items. I'd have to.
First of all, are those still serviceable?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's new technology, and that's the difference between the 54 and the 74. Is there new technology, new speakers that we can add to this? I'm not quite positive. The one thing that I'm excited about is that we are going to get a professional to come in here and evaluate the system who knows what the system's like. We do have local professionals here that have worked on the system since its inception and are agreeing to stay on the contract to keep working on it. The resources are here to do that. We can answer some of those questions going down of what it would cost. And that's what is part of my recommendations is I would want to find out what it would cost to fix this and what needs to be fixed. And I would like to have you guys weigh in on and make the decision on, do you want to maintain it? Do you want to keep it? Do you want to keep it as a nostalgic thing in 1954? Or do you want to grow it into something that's current and reliable?
So
and that's really the question.
is the basis for this that the fire district just says they aren't going to do it anymore?
So I can answer a little bit. It's not that necessarily the fire district. This doesn't fall under the fire district. There's no fire district that I can find in the nation that does a siren system. They fall under a city.
Would you come up to the chair there so we can pick you up on the speaker? Thanks a lot, Mark.
The fire districts don't do sirens. That isn't. It falls under emergency management, a city or a county. And so that's where it started hanging up. Is our insurance started talking to, why are you guys doing this? Why do you guys have a liability? And then when the Orford siren started failing, that's what really got going. Of why are we as a fire district doing this? And so there was never the thing of the fire district saying, we're done, we're going to go start tearing the sirens down. That wasn't ever the concept. The concept was, we need to start talking about who really should be managing this. And so that's where the conversation started with Rick. It is looking at who really should be managing this, because it should be the fire district. Yes, we started it. But as Rick has really alluded to, we started it, there was a little upgrades, but it's been a slow thing. I mean, it still is stuck in his analogy of 1954 that we still have to go to the fire station and push the test button, push the manual button. There's a lot better ways out there. But we haven't had the finances literally to keep it going, do the upgrades. There is, and some of what he said is we have got sirens from other communities and stripped parts out of them to keep these going. I have a bay full of parts in Arch Cape, old sirens we've stripped the parts out of to keep these going. That now I'm trying to get rid of the scrap because that's all they are, scrap. We've taken all the parts out. So that's kind of where we got to the point of this needs the next step. I need somebody with emergency management that can integrate this with other emergency managers to make a regional system instead of just our system.
But is the fire district willing to contribute to the ongoing cost of this?
I don't know if that's out of the question. I think the main thing that the board wanted was to get out of the management of it.
I'm just saying, you know, I have a large new source of income for infrastructure coming up in another few weeks or month, who knows? So I guess I'd be looking to at least continue financial support from the fire district, especially if we're going to put and maintain towers outside of the city limits.
I wouldn't recommend maintaining the tower outside the city limits. I would just say that we as a city should not be outside of our borders. That's a county issue or that's a fire district issue that has responsibility there. I'd recommend that only we look at these 5 within the city, and then do we partner with the fire district as a recommendation to do the other 2 and us to work together? Do we look at the county for support? Do they disable them, which I hope doesn't happen, but I wouldn't ask the city of Cannon Beach to go that far out on a limb.
But where I was saying, they just walking away from that they had responsibility for.
I think that'll be,
Our district takes those that are outside the city limits. When you say it doesn't belong to the fire department, it really seems to me it belongs with the county.
you're right.
And I don't see that at the table, so.
Well, when they, according to the documents through the fire department, and I won't speak for Mark at all, but when they gave them equipment for free, they had full responsibility to maintain it, own the proper, own the equipment, and to continue using it. That was in the fire district. That was their responsibility.
That was the MOU they had.
That was the MOU they had.
Is that being terminated?
When I talked to the county about where's that MOU stand, they weren't even, they're like, well, that's so old.
Yeah, they probably couldn't even find it.
Yeah, that's long gone.
I think what staff's recommendation would be to do the Wayland study, find out what the numbers really are. And then at the, either the staff level can have conversations with the fire district, or we can bring everything to you and you can provide direction to us as far as continuing conversation with the fire district. But I think we need to know the numbers and kind of go from there.
I think it would be important to ask the people in Arch Cape how they feel about it, because maybe the county should hear what Arch Cape population feels. It might impress them.
Yeah,
exactly. And I have 2 board members that live in Arch Cape, and that's what they're doing right now. That's exactly the conversation happening right now in Arch Cape. It's what are we gonna do with the towers?
Yeah.
Are we gonna keep it or not? What does the public down there want?
I could see a scenario where the city took over more on the management side to relieve you folks of that, but would look for some financial assistance to keep it at its current scale or scope or whatever. And, something to do with ongoing, those kind of things. But we need the numbers to be able to go ahead and have that conversation.
That's my biggest concern. If you're asking for feedback from the council, my thought is I would very much like to keep it. I'd like it updated and integrated, as Rick was saying. I want everything, but I want to know how much it costs.
Yeah.
But just from what I've heard tonight, it seems like it would be fairly easy to amortize, not a very large amount of money per year to come up with. I'm not hearing,
But those are components, and I think that there are other elements.
Sure.
And that's why I think we need the overall study from somebody that knows what they're talking about.
Absolutely.
But
It's not developing a new dispatch center, which will cost millions. This is something different. And I want you guys to realize that we can do this, but numbers are everything. But the key, I think, is, and it really comes down to, do you guys want to move forward with something like this?
I personally,
I think the cows program is a good one to have. I just don't want to write a blank check.
Yeah, we just want to see the numbers, and that's the next step.
well, something that was brought up earlier was that, no, I don't want to keep this for nostalgia. I want this as an important piece of public safety.
Very good.
And
Thank you, but I want
to be modernized.
Yep.
But I want it to sound like a cow for nostalgia's purpose on the train.
I honestly don't care what it sounds
but
like,
it's-
but I'm
It's
not
good. Come on.
gonna voice a different opinion.
Yeah, when we test it, it's got to sound like something I like the cows. I'm sorry, Sam, I didn't mean.
No, you just took what I was gonna say, because the only nostalgia part is the cow.
Yeah, and I'm glad you guys are discerning that, because it is a lot of money for a nostalgia citywide PA system. A lot of money for that, but it does have other value for sure.
The siren value alone, I think the upgrade is going to give us more flexibility with what it could do. We don't know yet. We'll find out. But right now, you can talk over it. But there's other sounds that it might be able to make. We don't, that would be worth studying to find out what kind of, what the other cities might do in that same situation.
When I talked to Cannon Beach Electric and as well as to Seaside, City of Seaside, both of the systems that we currently have now and the system that they have the ability to have programmed MP3 audible recordings, whatever that was, whatever the purpose of that was. And so even to get there to where you had announcements or you had things that were not just tsunami driven, you could do that on a system like that, and it's not that big of a leap to be able to have it a citywide PA to give you some, whether you're doing a fire evacuation or something like that, it's going to have a purpose. Right now, it's not being utilized that way.
So let's get the numbers. And council, would you like staff to, once we have the numbers, just to see them and then provide us with direction? Or to get the numbers, provide them to you, and then have conversations with the fire district before we present?
I would like to have numbers. And I would like to discuss it at that point, just because I think the larger issue here is that in this meeting, given all the information that I've been giving, I understand the fire district's position and am willing to discuss it further because I see the merit of our city administering this going further. I don't want there to be this perception that all of a sudden we're just taking it on because we want to help the fire department.
Right, okay, let us bring you the numbers, and then we won't have any discussions with fire. We'll get direction from you. Okay?
I don't want to speak for everybody else.
No, that's fine.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's good to get this going. I don't see it needs to be done tomorrow. So having more discussion is perfect way to do it. When did you say the Wayland guy was coming?
He's coming the first week in February.
Until middle of February.
Right, and so we have about a month until we do this. The numbers that I have is as much research as that I could come with in the period of time from when we kind of stopped talking about it. And it was like, they made a decision, now we got to take some action and give you some information. But in general, we'll know more after the Wayland representative comes out here and talks to us.
Very good.
And then we will bring it to the first available workshop after we get the report. We'll send you the report when we get it, but until we'll workshop first.
And the fire department is continuing it.
We're still doing it. We're testing memory the first Wednesday of the month.
Thank you.
He's talking about batteries. We have a battery replacement. That's, I guess, the one thing that has been done fairly consistently is replacing those batteries. And so we've kind of got our rotation through the towers and replace the batteries.
Yeah, and Rick was talking about importance of a dispatch center. That's because there has to be somebody that's ready to go ahead and make it go now. As soon as the information comes in, that's always been somebody went to the fire station or whatever. So that piece has to be solved also.
And the practice drills are still on Wednesday.
Yeah, first one's every monthly. There.
Are those sirens or horns directional, did you say?
Yes, some of them have multiple horns on them for multi-directional. The one down at Orford used to actually have, was it 4 or 3? It was 4. So they went in a 360-degree pattern, and 3 of the sirens have fallen off, that's where they start getting to the point toward, well, do we go out and find a 360-degree siren, which could cost thousands, or do we start thinking about this has outlived its purpose?
There's 2 at the north end of town. It's Bruce, wherever they are, this side of the creek. They talk over each other. You can't understand anything it's saying.
Yeah, there might be one of the things that we were doing before this decision was made by the fire board is Chief and I were researching different concepts where you can actually have a better system engaged and there'd be 3 towers or 3 sirens versus 5. So you could actually use modern technology and reduce the amount of sirens, but improve your coverage. So there's other things to look at out there that we can modernize the system. It would be a cost, but it would be less ongoing maintenance down the road.
Have you guys talked to Cleve?
Cleve?
Yeah.
I have it.
Talk to Cleve about the history of how that was put together, because I remember they brought in a truck that had a pole and they drove that thing around town and tested the best locations for the tower.
I remember that.
And then they put them up and then they came back like a couple of years later and moved them because they were tweaking it so finitely and they had pros coming from somewhere, military or something. So there is some precision that was established originally. Now that might have changed because as soon as you start changing what one siren does, like overpowering another siren, or they start getting old and weaker, who knows? That precision changes. I think Cleve might be able to remember that.
It'll be good. It'd be good to talk to him about that. And we may not need two sirens that close together.
No.
That's something that I want to, how do you modernize it and maybe lean it out and make it even better?
Yeah, I remember Al A had taken his Jeep down on the beach and moving 100 feet, testing the siren, moving 100 feet, testing the siren to see if he could hear them all the way up and down the entire 2 miles. So there is something to that. But new tech will get change on this. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We're officially over halfway done with this meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
I think I'm just about all the way done.
Yeah, next item is Kennebec Elementary School Board contact. Bruce?
Yes, there's a draft of a letter put together at council direction. Had a chance to give it some more thought, so I put down a couple of things from a recommendation standpoint. One is that I couldn't think exactly of what to put in the letter to say this is what we're asking you to do. So I think maybe having a better idea of what it is we want them to do before we do the invite. And there will be, by putting that together, there will be benefits to the council and to staff if we can kind of nail that down some. One recommendation I would like to make is to add the food bank to that group.
Yeah, that was one of mine.
Yeah. So we're gonna stay, they're gonna stay there. Yeah. And so I think it's really critical because they're the only ones that are gonna be there like all the time. And beyond that, if council has any other direction, if you want to move quicker, if you want to wait a little bit, I really like the concept, but I'm not sure, like, again, I couldn't put down something and say, this is what you'll do.
I think you need to add the HREF and the History Center as well.
Yeah. Certainly. Good additions. Is there anything more on this we want to talk about tonight? Or do you want to move it to another workshop or?
Tonight I'm comfortable with moving it to another workshop. I would like to have a chance to give you some input.
Good.
But I haven't been able to since I read the first time.
Yeah.
So, let's go ahead and do that.
We have some time. Okay, good.
Prepared food tax consultant. Bruce.
Yes, I think by the end of the week, we will have somebody under contract. It's somebody somewhat new to the area, well, actually not new to the area. They've done a lot of similar work dealing with the technology with one of the breweries in Astoria, starting her own company. The discussion that we had followed easily right along with this. There's some systems that she knows already, like Square, but there are others that she's had to research. So she's going to go in, find out what system they've got. If she has to do research, she'll do research with the distributor or whoever, the company, and then come up with the recommendations for us. And we've not talked about a rate, but we're talking about doing it on an hourly basis. And we're also looking at our business licenses because we think there are some businesses out there that might be doing something that are not the obvious thing like a restaurant or a coffee shop that we're not sure. And so we want to make sure that we're touching everybody that should be. And in the conversation that I had, her name is Holland. And the conversation that we had is that she's under no expectation that she will answer questions about, what if the bagel's sliced or not or whatever. Hers is strictly technology. And she will bring us a report. This is what it will cost to go ahead and take care of this restaurant, to go ahead and take care of this one. We talked about one concept that I just haven't figured out how to make it work. That's that if she goes into a place and it already has a system, that part is not turned on yet. Does she turn it on and, get it done like that? Or come back and report to us But it's kind of hard for me to, I'm thinking for right now, my limited brains, that bring it back and say that all I have to do is go ahead and do X, Y, Z for that one. Told her that scope with us is to provide the reports. And that if the businesses want to use her once they get their grants or whatever, I said, that's fine. We're not going to worry about that. But she's not working for the city to go in and touch anybody's equipment so that suddenly we're liable for any problems. So we are completely separated from any work that somebody might do. The information we have is going to be related to what it would cost. And then y'all make a decision on how the grant program should work.
Is she making a recommendation to the restaurants about what equipment they might be able to use?
She's making a recommendation to us. She's looking at what they've got and says that like the McCarthy brewery has this equipment and they need to do this to be able to go ahead and capture the point of service stuff that we're talking about.
But what happens if McCarthy Brewers doesn't want to do it that way? They want to do it another way.
Then they're, I guess we would be reasonable. Suppose it was going to be $1,000 to do it the way that we were looking at, and it'd be $1,200 the way that they want to do it. We could go ahead and take a look at that and see if it makes that much of a difference. But usually we're going to be working from their existing equipment. And so they've already made a commitment in this. And one of the things that I liked is that her background is making, pulling pieces together and integrating them into a system that gives you the information that you need. So she's able to go ahead and look at a system and say that, okay, well, you need this, or she can contact the vendor and get the information. But the companies, the businesses will get her report from us. She will provide us with the report. We will send it to them and say, we're going to get back to you when we know what the grant is going to be. Okay. We're trying to get you the best information that we can.
Since this is totally separate, or do you still feel comfortable being able to produce something in the next couple of weeks? To get,
not necessarily for this.
Not for this, but something that comes from the city saying we're.
That's my next question.
Okay.
What do you expect us to be able to provide by February 1st? We've already put out some information that says this is how you figure if it's taxable or not taxable. We will provide them this report when it becomes available. We're in good shape in that we already have the software to do TLT on our Excel system. And so it's going to be very similar. And so we just are going to work with Excel and then do the same thing, same processes and all that sort of thing for the PFT. So we don't have a lot of in-house work to try to crank to get those things out. What I would prefer to get direction from you, but I could ask some of the folks, well, what do you need to know? But we already put a lot of Q&As out, your frequently asked questions and those kinds of things. So I'm not sure what else there is. I don't think we'll be able to give them the forms and everything by February 1st. Maybe we will. But there's, when we get, through the work on Excel, they'll have it all. And hopefully we'll have a system that goes ahead and just rolls it up like most of the hotels have.
If you're asking for feedback, my wish would be that at the very minimum, they would have a number and a person to contact with questions and answers. And that they would be provided a copy of the ordinance that they can know, at least we know that they've all gotten it. And that we are going to be moving forward with the most, reasonable amount of speed to get.
With all, and somebody I worked with is move forward with all deliberate speed.
And does that include having a specific person they can call to ask questions about what this covers? Even though they have the ordinance, they're not going to understand it probably.
Well, that's why I would expect that there'd be somebody that they could talk to and have their questions answered.
I'm not sure if I'll be able to designate that contact person and have that person totally up to speed by February 1st.
Okay.
I'm not even sure who that would be yet.
Okay.
But we'll get it as quickly as we can, and we can also get information out like the FAQs and some other.
Can you convey that information?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we definitely want to have a contact person once we're finally starting that up.
I think that would be the most, that's where all the questions are going to come from.
Sure. And probably, I would say it's probably going to be somebody in finance, because probably most of the questions are going to be, how do I pay this? How does this work? How do I get your form into my system? That sort of thing. But there will be somebody, I told you there's some immediate changes coming up in finance. So I want to give them a little bit of time to get their legs under them.
Sure.
And I will send something out to the chamber saying that we had this conversation and this is our schedule that we're trying to make these things happen. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Right.
Okay. And our last item is city council visioning. What are you asking there, Bruce?
Well, y'all had said you were going to individually work on a vision of the city or something. I think that's a good starting point. I think that when we talked a while back, there's a process where it's more public and there's more other things, but it's a whole nother thing. I don't know if I would get that in the way of the I'm sorry, the code audit. I think the code audit's some of those things to try to keep on going rather than say we're going to start a visioning process. But y'all had said you were going to try to get an idea among yourselves or a definition of what the vision is, or your vision is. And that will help yourselves and staff to work on trying to base any feedback or anything that we're giving you to try to tie it to that particular statement for now.
I've already written mine out, but I don't want to give it to anybody.
It's so good.
I just get tired of getting slammed all the time.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
And in a public meeting, gee, you know what, so-and-so's,
yeah,
it's just a visioning. Where can we be in 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
And really, I think we have a terrific comprehensive plan.
Mm-hmm.
And we just adhere to that with each decision we make. We go a long way toward meeting the objectives of our comprehensive plan.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with that. I think the comprehensive plan is good. It's just we got to get it supported by the code.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of tweak it later on if you want to.
Yeah, I guess that's after writing about 3 pages of, issues and vision.
Yeah.
But I see this town looking like. I thought, I don't want to give it to somebody and then.
Why don't we try and do something, I'm thinking similar to the way we create the agenda for the retreat.
Mm-hmm.
Is we each send something to Bruce and Bruce can take our names off of them and compile it into one document.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can then be all responsible for the one document and use that to initiate discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it you want us to send to Bruce?
Whatever Mike wrote. Well, something that, what I was going to
A
do.
format kind
again-
of, shouldn't there?
Pardon?
Shouldn't there be a format kind of, a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, do you want us to send topics like we sent to him for retreat, or do you want us to send a?
I didn't have a choice. I don't have an option. What I was going to do was read through the comprehensive plan and say what I thought was important and what I thought needed updating. That's all I was gonna do. I don't know what Mike
I
did.
kind of did something. I started with the comprehensive plan and picked out excerpts that I thought really focus on the future of the town. And then wrote, this is what I would see as I come into town. This is what I would like to see. And really a vision of what's there. And then I listed, these are topics that need to be addressed to reach that vision. And read back through it and you think, oh, that's stupid.
That sounds like a crazy man.
Yeah. I'd be willing to share it with Bruce and let him try to compile other people's thoughts and make some sense of it. But, I'm getting tired of being shot at.
I understand.
Well, I think, Mike, there's one thing that deflects that a bit is that it really needs to be a public process. And so I think if you look at it from a standpoint of us just trying to start a discussion, and I think we've been given a bit of a template on how to elicit response from the community. Unfortunately, it involves controversy.
God, we don't have enough of that around here.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think what we've just suggested is a really good start.
You can always go out and ask the citizens, what's your vision?
That might even be better.
I think that's what
I think that's ultimately where it has to wind up.
Yeah, but that's critical to get the right answer, but it is a big deal. It's not something we go ahead and we do, in an afternoon or something. So that's what I'm saying. What I'd like to recommend is that we don't do anything with this right now. It's just one more thing that we've got on top of everything else. I think a lot of this stuff, the visioning and all that sort of thing, is going to come out when we have the group discussions of the code audit. That where we end up with those, we'll go ahead and, innately, it's because I have this vision that I want to go this way, and I'll understand Sam's and Robin's better based on the way that they go. And I'm not sure if this won't just, take time when we really don't know how we're going to use it yet. So I'm just trying to take something off of your plate and off of Ben's plate.
A lot of the things we already have ongoing are long-term.
Yeah.
And so decisions have already been made. It's going to help shape the town for the future.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I ran into. I thought, this would be good. We've already got the infrastructure growing. We've already got the code audit. We got the tightening of ordinances. We got gathering place. We have police, fire department. There's a lot of big projects.
Yeah.
And the parks and so those things are already started. And if those aren't our vision, we've already made a mistake.
Right.
But I think we've done a good job. And so I'm not sure how far out this vision has to be. If it's too far out, it means nothing.
I think what we're doing is we're responding to changing conditions, and we are using the comprehensive plan, which is still quite valid, to try to go ahead and make those decisions. I don't see anything that we're doing that's out of whack with that.
Yeah.
So I think that we're lucky that we have
that's a good plan,
a good document to go ahead and go from. And we kind of that. So as we talk about the code audit, it's all about the comp plan. And if we're in favor of what it says, then for at least most of it will be good.
I think the code audit process, it's going to be a lengthy process.
Yep.
But I would look at it like the way Jeff has done the TSP. just bigger. And the TSP had a whole lot of really good public interaction. And he's going to do it again. So I think that's going to happen in the process. All we're doing with this is just getting ourselves kind of oriented and all in the same direction of some sort, so we can talk about it.
So can we take that step for now? And if it looks like, well, we're missing, there's a big hole in the front of my teeth, we go ahead and we pick it up again?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've removed it from all the work sessions on our agenda list.
At least until we're worked out on some of the other problems we got going. Okay. At that, we are complete. So good to the order.
Okay, I just sent Jen a picture from your phone or to your phone. And I had talked to Jim Pano the other day because I think sometimes we don't know what the chamber does do for us as far as letting the membership know. And so he said he would send the 4th of July pictures. And I was hoping maybe that you could put them up for us to see if do you work that fast?
Oh, I can send him to Rusty and he can do it.
Yeah. And they are really happy to do this. And you know, at the bottom of each one of the weekly memos, they do have a place for the Cannon Beach City to have a comment. So it might be nice for us to start using that more if we don't. But I thought this was so impressive, these beautiful pictures. And I think the more we can work with the chamber to get those messages out, like Nancy would like, the better.
Yeah, speaking of which, I don't see anybody from the city attending those Wednesday morning meetings yet. They're on Zoom and they're only 40 minutes long, so I checked the minutes today and I didn't see anybody from there.
They are on Wednesday, and I know, at least for me, that's our Realtor Tour Day that we.
I think so. It may take,
It's not coming up.
well, it's going to take a while for it to sync because I haven't email on this in a while.
Okay.
So it's not instantaneous.
That's okay. I got a lot of things for good of the order.
And then the other thing I just wanted to bring up, I know that we all spoke about it a little earlier, but Rick and Public Works help with River, the Vault, is that right? Yeah, GIBEAUT. And how they reacted so quickly to helping with a flow of water in Elk Creek. So we're all really proud of both Rick and Public Works for.
They just moved here too from Astoria. They just moved to Cannon Beach from Astoria a couple months ago, 3 months ago.
I think the other individual was, I think it was Wes Garvin.
It was.
Yeah. Thanks for recognizing that, Robin.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. Number one, signs are going up.
Yay.
You folks had asked for it before. We put up, I don't know, 6 or 10 or something, but all the signs are out of my office that are replaceable. And so they are trying to get to that as best they can. So those are going up.
Is that the signs for the mass?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The next thing, as a result of the high water, we experienced some major problems in wastewater. And that's that the wet wells have a system that you want to be able to go ahead and push water out, but not have water come in. And there's a check valve to stop it from coming in. Well, 3 of the wet wells, the check valves were no longer functioning the way they should. And so we had, in order to stop them from overflowing, we had people out there from like 3 a.m. Operating all the pumps manually to, keep it down. And so they did a great job because nobody noticed that there was, sewage flowing any place. But we need to replace those 3 check valves. So we'll be looking to take some funds from contingency, bring this to the February meeting. It'll cost about $60,000. That's to keep rainwater from entering the wet wells and then us treating it and moving it and all those things. So they did a great job. There was problems everywhere with because water infiltrates wastewater systems because the pressure is greater outside than it is in the pipe. So all that water just goes in. It doesn't really go out very often, but it was happening everywhere. So they kept everything working, kept our numbers down, all that. So they did a great job. The next thing is just want to remind everybody for the special meeting regarding project financing on January 19th. And that's at 5:30. And then if everything is acceptable, and we've been working hard with the consultants to get them to meet our expectations, that the first opportunity we would have for you to vote on the items would be February 1st meeting. And there's 2 things related to Cannon Beach Elementary. One is an authorization to move forward with the financing. And then the second thing is a resolution, a reimbursement resolution saying that we intend to reimburse the general fund for expenses incurred already. And so that would be for the roofs, for the ZCS study, those kind of things. So that's the 2 elements it would be with Cannon Beach Elementary. And then we also are investigating our ability to do a reimbursement resolution for some of the things that the costs we incurred early on in the City Hall police station project. So there's a chance that you'll have 3 resolutions, but the one related to City Hall in the police station has nothing to do with authorizing staff to move forward on financing. That's not going to happen until October, November, but it does say that we intend to repay the general fund for these costs incurred towards the project. So that's kind of what will be happening. So that's all I have. Thank you.
And here are the pictures that were up for the 4th of July fireworks. And I think they were really nicely done. And I hope, in the future, we'll have New Year's up too for those things.
Oh, they're funny looking birds.
Yep. Okay, let's call for a go to the order.
We don't have coffee on Monday, but we do have coffee on the 24th.
Yes.
Right. So 10 a.m. on the 24th for anybody who's left out there. Please join us for coffee with the counselors.
The people that are out there are the type of people that will come to the
Come
coffee.
to the coffee, yes.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.